In the soft hush before sunrise, when the world still drifts between darkness and light, the hills of Latium seem to breathe in a slow, ancient rhythm. Mist clings to their rounded shapes, rising like faint memories from the earth itself, and the first hints of morning brush the sky with pale gold. It is in this quiet hour that the land feels almost alive, as though it remembers stories older than cities, older than names, older even than the people who once wandered its slopes. Before Rome became an empire, before it was even a whisper in human imagination, it was simply this: a peaceful stretch of soil, river, and sky, waiting silently beneath the unfolding dawn. Down in the valleys, the Tiber River moves with an unhurried patience. Its gentle currents catch the early light, turning it into a silver ribbon that winds between the hills. For thousands of years, this river has carried driftwood, silt, and the faint promise of possibility. Shepherds once stood along its banks, their flocks gathered around them like drifting clouds of wool. They watched the water glide past, unaware that the same river would one day run through the heart of the most powerful city in the ancient world. Yet even then, long before Rome existed, the river was shaping the future in quiet, invisible ways. Across the landscape, small settlements, no more than clusters of huts, rest lightly on the earth. Their smoke spirals upward, soft and thin, mingling with the morning air. These early communities are simple, built from wood, clay, and hope. Families wake slowly, stirring embers from the night before, preparing for days filled with familiar tasks, tending animals, trading with neighboring tribes, and watching the shifting seasons for signs of what might come next. Life follows a gentle rhythm, humble but rooted deeply in the land. There is no sense of urgency here, no hint of the monumental story that is about to unfold. Yet the land itself holds clues. The soil is fertile, enriched by volcanic ash from distant mountains. Grain grows easily, and vineyards take root in terraces carved by patient hands. To the south, the sea lies close enough to offer fish, trade routes, and breezes that soften the heat of summer. To the north, the hills curve in protective arcs around the settlements, forming natural defenses that will one day help a small community survive threats from all sides. Geography, quietly and without drama, is already writing the earliest lines of Rome's story. As the morning brightens, traders begin to move along worn footpaths. They carry pottery, salt, amber, and stories from lands farther than most villagers have ever imagined. These travelers do more than exchange goods. They weave together cultures, customs, and knowledge. When they pause at a settlement along the Tiber, they share tales of distant peoples, strange rituals, and unfamiliar gods. And without realizing it, they bring ideas that will one day shape Roman identity: resilience, curiosity, and a belief that the world is wide enough to explore. The hills of Latium stand quietly through it all. They have watched generations rise and fall, cycles of peace and conflict, years of abundance and years of drought. They cradle the settlements in their gentle folds, offering shelter and vantage points from which to understand the surrounding land. A shepherd climbing one of these hills might look out and see the river gleaming, the forest stretching toward the horizon, and the faint outlines of neighboring villages. In that moment, the world feels vast yet connected, ready for a story worthy of its potential. But even in this peaceful landscape, small tensions simmer beneath the surface. Different tribes occupy neighboring hills, each with its own customs, dialects, and sense of belonging. The Latin tribes, the Sabines, the Etruscans, all coexist in a delicate balance shaped by trade, marriage, competition, and the natural push and pull of human ambition. They do not know it yet, but their interactions, conflicts, and alliances will soon merge into something far greater than any of them individually could imagine. As the day continues, the land awakens fully. Farmers move to their fields, guiding plows pulled by oxen through rich earth. Women gather water from shallow streams, their voices rising in soft conversation. Children chase each other along dusty paths, their laughter carrying faint echoes across the hillsides. Life unfolds slowly, framed by the rhythm of the natural world. Nothing seems extraordinary at first glance, and yet there is a quiet beauty in the simplicity, a sense that the land is waiting for the right moment to reveal its deeper story. Perhaps the most remarkable thing is how unremarkable everything appears. If you were to stand on a hilltop and watch the people move through their morning routines, you might never guess that this tranquil region would one day give birth to an empire that stretched across continents. How does such a transformation begin? What invisible forces were already at work, shaping the future from behind the scenes? These questions hover gently in the air, carried on the same breeze that stirs the tall grass. For now, there is only calm. The hills remain still, the river continues its steady flow, and the settlements go about their quiet lives. Yet beneath the surface, destiny gathers like the soft glow before sunrise. The geography, the people, the resources, and the stories exchanged between distant travelers, all these elements are slowly weaving together. In time, they will spark a chain of events that will echo across centuries. But in this moment, the land rests, unaware of the empire that sleeps within its soil, waiting to awaken. As the sun climbs higher, warmth settles over the hills, touching the fields and drifting through the quiet air. Scents of wild herbs rise under soft footsteps, and even the forests seem to watch in silence. Calmness lingers, yet something unspoken gathers beneath the surface, waiting for a future no one here could imagine. Something ancient quietly stirs beyond the hills. In the hush of early dawn, when the sky still carries a pale blue softness, the old stories begin to drift through the hills of Latium like gentle echoes. These are not sharp, heroic tales told with thunder and spectacle. Instead, they move with the calm rhythm of a bedtime story, woven from the dreams and fears of a people trying to understand their place in the world. Among the earliest whispers is the legend of two brothers, Romulus and Remus, whose lives float somewhere between memory and imagination. Their tale does not need to be proven, it only needs to be felt, the way ancient people once felt the land speak to them through wind and silence. According to the story, the twins were abandoned as infants, left beside the slow-moving Tiber in a moment of danger and uncertainty. Yet instead of fading into the forgotten corners of history, they were found by a creature more symbolic than literal, a she-wolf, whose warm breath and steady heartbeat kept them alive. Whether she was an animal, a metaphor for a nearby tribe, or a guardian in human form no longer matters. What remains is the tenderness in the image, two infants curled beside a protective figure, watched over by something wild and strong. It is a story that comforts even now, reminding listeners that survival often begins with unexpected kindness. When the boys grew, they built their lives among shepherds and wanderers who moved lightly across the hills. Their childhood feels wrapped in quiet imagery. Simple huts, crackling fires, soft evenings spent watching shadows stretch across the land. Later, when the brothers chose to build a new settlement near the place of their rescue, their disagreement would lead to tragedy. Romulus, in the end, would stand alone as the founder of the city that carried his name. And while the myth includes conflict, it is not told tonight as a tale of violence. It is shared instead as a gentle reflection on the fragile beginnings of identity. Even the strongest empires begin with doubt, dreams, and the complicated nature of family. From this story, the land slowly transitions into history. The sacred hills that once framed the brothers, legend gradually fill with people searching for structure and meaning. These early Romans do not yet imagine themselves as conquerors. They gather as clans, families bound by ancestry and ritual, each with its own customs, small shrines, and traditions passed carefully from parent to child. Their world is still small, held together by shared meals, seasonal festivals, and a quiet respect for forces greater than themselves. Religion here is gentle. It is not built on fear but on a sense of presence, spirits in the rivers, in the hearth fires, in the boundaries of fields that must be protected. Every home carries traces of devotion. A small offering of grain, a whispered blessing for safe harvests, a simple statue guarding the doorway. These early beliefs form the soft inner lining of Roman identity, long before temples and grand ceremonies rise from the earth. People are not yet worshipping Jupiter on high pedestals. Instead, they honor the subtle rhythms of nature, finding comfort in the idea that the world listens back. As the community grows, leaders emerge. The early kings of Rome stand at the edge of myth and memory, some historical, some legendary, all woven together by centuries of storytelling. They guide the settlement gently, shaping laws, organizing rituals, and establishing the foundations of civic structure. These kings are remembered not as distant rulers, but as symbolic figures in Rome's childhood, guiding a fragile new society with patience and ritual rather than authority alone. Their names drift softly through the air, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius, figures who blend into the same warm glow as the early morning sun touching the hills. Around them, the settlement begins to breathe like a living organism. Houses cluster more closely, pathways develop into steady roots, and the central space of the community becomes a gathering point for discussion, trade, and celebration. Life remains simple, but the threads connecting people grow stronger. Nights are filled with storytelling, where elders share memories that are half real and half dream, shaping the collective imagination of those who listen. Why do people hold so tightly to myth? Perhaps because stories help them make sense of what cannot yet be explained. Perhaps because every community needs a shared beginning and shared hope. The myths do not claim to be literal history. They exist to anchor identity, to create a sense of belonging, to remind people that even in a world of uncertainty, their community has a place within something larger. In the quiet darkness of ancient Rome, these tales serve as lanterns. They soften the fear of the unknown and give shape to emotions that words alone cannot hold. Myths explain why families pray at dawn, why festivals matter, why the hills feel sacred, and why one river valley can feel like the center of the world. As the city slowly takes form, its rituals become ways of nurturing peace. The Romans trace boundaries with careful steps, using plows to mark the edges of fields. They light small fires at crossroads, believing they help protect travelers. They gather for feasts not only to celebrate victories, but to honor the rhythms of harvests and seasons. These customs, simple as they seem, weave a fabric of unity that will one day support armies, senators, poets, and thousands of ordinary people living side by side. The foundation of Rome is not stone or power. It is the shared belief that stories, rituals, and community bind life together. Even the landscape participates. The hills, Aventine, Palatine, Capitoline, become more than geographic features. They become symbols of memory, each holding a layer of meaning. The Palatine is remembered as the place where Romulus built his first walls. The Aventine becomes a home for common people and their hopes. The Capitoline grows into the heart of Rome's sacred identity. Yet in these early days, the hills remain quiet and soft, their significance still forming like clay shaped by gentle hands. As evening settles over Latium, the early city glows with faint lights. Fires flicker behind doorways, casting warm patterns on walls of wood and thatch. Children drift to sleep while elders sit beneath the open sky, watching stars shimmer above the darkened hills. Stories travel with the smoke, rising into the night. These stories are more than entertainment. They are blueprints for the future, quiet reminders that identity grows from imagination as much as from fact. In time, the myths will intertwine with history so deeply that separating them becomes impossible. But for now, they simply exist as comforting tales told in soft voices, carrying the gentle heartbeat of a young community learning who it is. Rome's beginnings are not loud. They unfold like a whisper, like a lullaby carried across the hills, shaping a destiny that no one at this moment could ever predict. In the gentle dimness of early Roman history, long before marble forums and triumphant generals, the city was guided by kings. Their stories float between myth and memory, forming the final chapter of a world still learning how to govern itself. These kings were not yet emperors or conquerors. They were caretakers of a growing community, shaping laws, rituals, and structures that would one day support a far greater destiny. Their reigns feel like the last slow breaths of an era that was beginning to shift, quietly, towards something new. Among the early kings, some were remembered for wisdom. Numa Pompilius, for example, was said to have brought spiritual calm to Rome. He organized rituals, taught the people how to honor the gods, and grounded the city in a sense of sacred rhythm. Under his guidance, Rome did not expand through war. It expanded inward, discovering shared meaning. Nights during his reign might have been filled with the soft glow of hearth fires, where families whispered prayers taught by their king, believing that peace itself could be a form of strength. But with time, other kings left a different imprint. As the monarchy aged, ambition began to creep into the throne. Kings became more assertive, more focused on displays of power, more willing to test the boundaries of their authority. These tensions did not erupt overnight. They grew slowly, like a subtle change in the wind that people sense before they understand it. The hills of Rome watched silently as dissatisfaction settled into the city, not as anger at first, but as a quiet discomfort that something had shifted. By the time Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, rose to the throne, Rome was no longer the fragile settlement it had once been. It was stronger, more organized, and increasingly aware of its own potential. Tarquin, however, ruled not with gentle hands but with a firmer grasp, tightening his hold over a people who were beginning to value freedom more than tradition. His reign became a symbol of excess. He diminished the Senate's role, silenced opposing voices, and surrounded himself with loyalists who echoed his decisions without question. Yet the city did not revolt immediately. Romans were used to kings. The system had guided them for generations. Instead, they watched. They whispered quietly. They sensed that something fundamental had changed. Tarquin's actions created a tension that did not roar but simmered, like warm water beginning to boil without making a sound. Even in the quietest moments, the people felt the weight of a king who no longer saw himself as a steward, but as the sole author of Rome's destiny. The turning point came not from political debate or strategic planning, but from a tragedy within Tarquin's own family. The story of Lucretia, a noblewoman wronged by the king's son, spread through Rome not with shouts but with pained, heavy breaths. Her fate became the final thread that snapped the fragile trust between ruler and people. The reaction was not fueled by sudden outrage. It was shaped by years of quiet discomfort finally finding its voice. The hills, the river, the hearths, all seemed ready for change. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the Romans gathered the courage to act. Their movement was not a chaotic uprising. It was a steady, collective refusal to accept a ruler who no longer respected the boundaries of power. They expelled Tarquin and his family, restoring a sense of balance to a city that had been leaning too far toward tyranny. The moment marks one of the most significant turning points in Western history, yet it unfolds in this retelling with gentle inevitability, as though Rome itself had been preparing for this shift for years. When the king was gone, the Romans faced a quieter question. What now? Without a monarch, the city had to imagine a new way forward. This is where the story settles into calm reflection. Instead of searching for a new king, the people chose to distribute authority more evenly. They created the offices of consuls, leaders elected for a single year, each holding the power to limit the other. This structure was fragile yet thoughtful, designed to prevent any single person from rising too far above the rest. Alongside the consuls, the Senate grew into a stabilizing body. No longer just an advisory group, it became the heartbeat of Roman decision-making. Senators, drawn mostly from Rome's most influential families, guided debates, crafted laws, and offered continuity in a system built on rotation. Their voices carried weight not through force, but through experience and collective memory. The Republic was not built in a day, nor with grand proclamations. It took shape the way an early morning sky lightens, slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly. This shift from monarchy to republic is one of the most profound rearrangements in Rome's history, yet it did not require armies or dramatic revolutions. Instead, it moved with the quiet resolve of a community discovering its own identity. In these early years, the Republic did not imagine future emperors, vast territories, or centuries of global influence. Its purpose was simpler, to create a structure that allowed the people to breathe more freely. There is something almost soothing in that simplicity, in the idea that one of history's greatest powers began with a collective exhale. As the Republic took its first steps, Romans likely felt a mix of uncertainty and hope. What would this new system look like a generation later? Could it succeed without the familiar stability of kings? No one knew. But there was a sense that Rome had reclaimed something essential, its right to shape its own future. Late at night, families must have talked softly, wondering if their small city was now safer, fairer, or more united. Perhaps they sensed, even faintly, that they had set something monumental in motion. With the monarchy gone, Rome was still a humble city of hills, farms, and narrow streets, but its political world had quietly transformed. No one at that moment could imagine the Republic becoming the foundation for an empire that would stretch across continents. Yet the spark was lit. The decision to reject kingship and give power to the people, however imperfectly, became the seed from which centuries of Roman greatness would grow. In this quiet chapter, the story of Rome's last kings becomes more than a tale of rulers. It becomes a gentle reminder that even the grandest civilizations begin with small, steady shifts, moments when ordinary people choose a different path. The Republic was born not from noise, but from reflection, from the calm determination of a community ready to reshape itself. And as Rome stepped into its new political dawn, the world around it waited, breath held softly, for what would come next. The sun rose gently over the hills of Rome, painting the city in muted gold as it embraced a world no longer ruled by kings. The early Republic emerged not with fanfare or violent upheaval, but with a measured, almost thoughtful sense of order. Romans, accustomed to monarchs, now faced the subtle responsibility of governing themselves. This new system, delicate and carefully structured, required patience, cooperation, and an understanding of limits. It was a time when the rhythm of civic life began to harmonize with the city's geography, culture, and the quiet pulse of its people. Central to this transformation were the consuls, two leaders elected annually to guide the city with equal authority. Their power was balanced, their term brief, designed to prevent one individual from dominating the Republic. Each consul's decisions could be checked by the other, creating a system of mutual respect and caution. In these early days, the role of the consul was as much symbolic as functional, a daily reminder that Rome was no longer a city of singular rule, but a community sharing responsibility. Citizens observed these leaders with a mix of curiosity and careful attention, understanding that even small choices could ripple through their lives. Alongside the consuls, the Senate began to take shape as the guiding body of the Republic. Comprised largely of Rome's elder statesmen, it grew into an institution of continuity and wisdom. Senators debated quietly, measuredly, their voices carrying the weight of both experience and moderation. Decisions were rarely made in haste. The calm of deliberation often replaced the suddenness of royal decree. Here, in these slow exchanges, the essence of Roman governance began to emerge: balance, foresight, and respect for tradition. The Senate's influence created a rhythm to public life, grounding citizens in a sense of order and purpose. Romans themselves adjusted to these new structures with patient curiosity. Duty became a central concept, not merely imposed by kings, but embraced as a communal responsibility. Every citizen, whether farmer, artisan, or soldier, understood that their actions contributed to the stability of the Republic. Law was no longer abstract. It was a living thread connecting families, neighborhoods, and the city as a whole. Even in ordinary moments, market mornings, quiet walks along the Tiber, or simple conversations in shaded courtyards, the principles of civic responsibility were quietly reinforced, weaving a fabric of identity that would endure for generations. Despite the calm, the Republic was not static. Ambition still simmered quietly in the hearts of men, tempered by the structures of government. Individuals sought recognition, influence, or temporary authority, yet they were constrained by the mutual checks embedded in the system. This interplay of personal drive and collective responsibility became a defining characteristic of early Roman life. In this tension, subtle lessons unfolded. Ambition could inspire greatness, but only if balanced by law and collaboration. The city observed and learned, growing steadily, almost imperceptibly, stronger in its cohesion. Citizens also turned their gaze to ritual and tradition, grounding the Republic in shared practices that transcended politics. Festivals, sacrifices, and sacred oaths reminded Romans of a higher order, a continuity beyond human control. These moments provided comfort and rhythm, reinforcing the idea that society was more than the sum of its offices or leaders. In quiet reflection, families would teach their children about duty and moderation, connecting the new political system to everyday life. Through these soft, repeated gestures, Rome began to internalize its identity not through fear, but through thoughtful participation. Even as Rome found stability, the seeds of its future conflicts were quietly planted. Neighbors watched with cautious interest, alliances and rivalries forming without immediate notice. The Republic's structure allowed for internal debate, yet it could not eliminate human ambition or unforeseen challenges. These early years were a period of gentle observation, as Romans learned the strengths and limits of their shared authority. Every decision, every dialogue, and every measured vote quietly shaped a city that was still small in size, but vast in potential. The interplay between leaders and citizens also reinforced a sense of belonging. Consuls did not rule in isolation, nor did senators make laws for faceless crowds. People understood that their input, whether through public assemblies or private council, mattered. The Republic taught the value of listening as much as speaking, of weighing consequences as carefully as desires. In this environment, political thought became a slow, contemplative exercise, inviting citizens to consider not only their own lives, but the welfare of the entire community. Through it all, Rome's identity took root in subtle ways. Geography, history, and culture intertwined to form a city whose citizens felt a quiet pride in their collective achievements. The Republic was less about dramatic victories and more about the patient cultivation of civic harmony. Even in the calm mornings and evenings, one could sense the growing cohesion of a society learning to govern itself without the singular shadow of a monarch. Every law, every ritual, every measured debate reinforced the idea that Rome was becoming something unique, an experiment in balance and responsibility. As this new system unfolded, Romans slowly adjusted to their roles in the civic tapestry. The early republic was a study in patience, observation, and careful structure. Citizens learned to trust institutions more than individuals, understanding that the strength of their city lay not in a single ruler, but in the interplay of many voices. In quiet moments, families and friends might discuss recent decisions, weighing their implications and imagining how these choices could echo far into the future. The Republic became a living lesson in governance, a gentle reminder that lasting strength is often built through measured, thoughtful effort rather than abrupt change. And so, the dawn of the Republic continued its slow, deliberate course. Rome was no longer a city of kings, but it was still a city of learning, discovery, and cautious experimentation. The principles of law, duty, and shared authority created a foundation upon which future generations would build. Citizens, guided by consuls and the Senate, began to see themselves as participants in a grand, unfolding story. Each day brought small lessons in patience, balance, and reflection, shaping not only political structures but the very identity of Rome itself. In these quiet, unhurried moments, the city learned what it meant to be a republic, laying the groundwork for centuries of history yet to come. The republic's early years were defined not by sudden conquests or sweeping battles, but by careful observation, quiet diplomacy, and the subtle shaping of relationships with those who surrounded Rome. The city, still modest in size and influence, looked beyond its hills with curiosity rather than ambition. Its neighbors, tribes of Latium, Etruscans to the north, and scattered settlements across Campania, were not enemies at first, but companions and occasional competitors in a landscape of rivers, valleys, and gentle plains. Roads began to take shape, simple at first, winding along natural contours, connecting villages, farms, and emerging towns. These early pathways were more than practical. They allowed ideas, customs, and families to move freely, knitting the region into a slowly expanding web of interaction. In these first decades, Rome learned the power of treaties and alliances. Leaders negotiated quietly, exchanging favors, promises, and oaths, establishing bonds that were as much social as they were political. These agreements were rarely sealed with pomp or ceremony, but their effects were lasting. Tribes would allow Roman merchants to pass, share knowledge of fertile lands, or even lend military support when small conflicts arose. Citizens understood that strength was often a product of careful patience rather than immediate domination. By observing neighbors closely, Rome began to absorb practices that enriched its own culture, blending agricultural techniques, religious rituals, and even legal ideas from those it interacted with. This quiet exchange built the foundation for a society both resilient and adaptable. Conflicts did arise, of course, but they were measured and often served as lessons rather than simple victories. Skirmishes were brief, involving limited forces, and rarely extended far beyond borders. These encounters shaped Roman character, teaching lessons about strategy, negotiation, and restraint. Young citizens listened to stories of cautious victories and near misses, absorbing the idea that growth required balance. Victory was not always about glory. It was about understanding one's environment, respecting limits, and learning from every encounter. Each small conflict reinforced a sense of identity and cohesion within the Republic, quietly preparing citizens for the challenges that larger ambitions would eventually bring. Alliances, however, were perhaps even more important than conflicts. Families, clans, and towns joined Rome in mutual understanding, creating bonds that extended citizenship gradually and subtly. Those who allied with Rome often gained privileges, rights to trade, protection, or even participation in civic rituals. Over time, citizenship became a thread that wove diverse communities into a single, expansive social fabric. Romans moved carefully, recognizing that the Republic's strength would come not only from territory, but from loyalty, shared customs, and a sense of collective belonging. The city's leaders understood that fostering respect and cooperation often outweighed force, and the people quietly absorbed these lessons, shaping a culture of inclusion that was still selective yet remarkably strategic. As roads extended, trade routes formed, carrying goods, ideas, and culture along their winding paths. Grain from fertile valleys, pottery from distant settlements, and textiles from neighboring hills traveled slowly but surely into the city. Markets became gathering places not only for commerce, but for exchange of knowledge, language, and values. These slow movements of culture reinforced a quiet curiosity in citizens. People learned to respect what was different, adapting innovations without losing the essence of Roman identity. Growth was not a sudden flood, but a measured, continuous flow that strengthened the Republic at its core. Romans also observed their neighbors, politics, and learned subtle lessons in governance. Each city-state or tribe offered a reflection of what might work and what might fail. Leaders noticed which alliances endured, which treaties faltered, and how communities managed internal conflicts without disrupting overall harmony. These observations were absorbed slowly, guiding future decisions in ways that were almost imperceptible to those living through them. Citizens internalized these patterns through conversation, ritual, and reflection, creating a sense of quiet awareness that extended far beyond immediate borders. Religion and ceremony, ever present in Roman life, also played a role in these gradual expansions. Sacred oaths were exchanged in neutral spaces, festivals hosted to honor shared deities, and rituals performed to acknowledge both allies and foes. These moments, calm yet profound, reinforced bonds and reminded all participants that even amidst differences, a shared understanding of the world existed. The Republic's approach to neighbors was not only practical, but also spiritual, a recognition that human connection carried weight beyond contracts or walls. Slowly, the Republic's influence extended across central Italy, yet it remained subtle and almost unnoticed in the broader picture. Citizens rarely realized the magnitude of these developments in real time. Roads, treaties, and alliances accumulated quietly, forming a network of interdependence that would later support more ambitious ventures. Strength was accumulating in patience, cooperation, and measured observation rather than in dramatic conquest. Even those living in distant villages felt connected to a growing entity whose power was woven into everyday life, not imposed by fear. By the end of these early years, Rome had established itself as more than a city. It had become a hub of relationships, diplomacy, and subtle influence. Growth was slow, deliberate, and grounded in understanding human nature. Citizens, whether observing a small skirmish, participating in a ritual, or traveling a newly built road, absorbed lessons that would endure for generations. The Republic's strength emerged from these quiet movements, an invisible architecture of loyalty, respect, and adaptability, forming a stable core upon which future expansion would rest. And so, in the gentle cadence of roads, treaties, and alliances, Rome's identity expanded without fanfare. Every interaction, every cautious negotiation, every measured conflict contributed to a growing sense of unity and purpose. The Republic learned to thrive not through immediate triumph, but through patient cultivation of relationships, blending cultures, and understanding the subtle rhythms of power. In these quiet moments, the city prepared itself for what it would one day become, a force whose strength was rooted not in reckless ambition, but in the slow, deliberate mastery of its world. Far across the waves of the western Mediterranean, a city of extraordinary promise glimmered under the sun. Carthage, a trading hub of remarkable skill and ambition, stretched along its crescent-shaped harbor, bustling with merchants, sailors, and craftsmen. Its ships, sleek and numerous, glided over the water with ease, carrying goods, ideas, and wealth from distant lands. The city pulsed with a rhythm unlike that of Rome's quiet hills and fertile valleys. Whereas Rome's growth had been careful, deliberate, and rooted in the soil, Carthage thrived on commerce, navigation, and the far-reaching influence of the sea. In this contrast lay the subtle tension that history would one day recognize as destiny. At this time, Rome's citizens remained largely unaware of the scale of Carthage's maritime power. Traders occasionally arrived with exotic wares, ivory, spices, and dyed fabrics from across the Mediterranean, but the Republic saw these encounters more as curiosities than as signs of an emerging rival. Carthage, on the other hand, observed Rome with a mixture of interest and caution. Its leaders recognized a disciplined, land-based society with an unwavering sense of duty, capable of building roads, alliances, and fortifications that would one day rival their own network of colonies. This quiet mutual awareness laid the foundation for an inevitable intersection, though the seeds of tension were as subtle as the soft lapping of waves on the harbor's edge. Life in Carthage was defined by movement and negotiation. Markets brimmed with conversation, coins exchanged hands with precision, and ships constantly set sail toward Africa, Iberia, and beyond. The city's people valued wealth and innovation, yet they also adhered to a strict hierarchy and social structure. Citizens understood that success on the water demanded vigilance, skill, and careful calculation. Rome, in contrast, cultivated strength through community bonds, land management, and disciplined military organization. Both societies excelled in different domains, and yet, despite the distance, their paths were beginning to converge in ways that neither fully comprehended. Rome's leadership, absorbed in consolidating influence across the Italian peninsula, felt secure in its slow, measured expansion. Treaties, alliances, and occasional skirmishes with neighbors continued to strengthen its position. Citizens rarely questioned the wisdom of their leaders, nor did they anticipate that a foreign power across the sea could soon challenge their growing authority. In this sense, Carthage represented an abstract presence, a shadow on the horizon, a quiet reminder that the world beyond Latium was vast, varied, and filled with forces equally determined to endure and prosper. The stage for a long, subtle rivalry was forming, unnoticed by most, but already etched into the currents of trade, diplomacy, and ambition. Carthage's influence extended beyond trade. Its colonies and outposts along the coastline served as nodes in a network that connected distant cities, cultures, and resources. These outposts functioned as watchful eyes and steady hands, allowing Carthage to exert power quietly, without the overt violence often associated with conquest. Rome, attentive yet cautious, watched these developments with mild curiosity. Citizens of the Republic, walking their hills and tending fields, likely had no conception of the scale or sophistication of a civilization that controlled vast swaths of the sea, nor could they have foreseen the subtle threat that such an entity might one day represent. In this early period, both powers were defined as much by what they were not as by what they were. Rome had yet to venture beyond Italy in earnest, while Carthage had yet to confront a land-based rival capable of sustained resistance. For now, the relationship existed as a delicate balance of awareness, untested by direct confrontation. Hannibal, whose name would later strike fear across continents, remained far away, growing within Carthage's circles, a child in a distant city, a figure who would one day embody this quiet storm. Even then, however, the potential for conflict was simmering beneath the calm surface, an invisible tension carried on Mediterranean winds. The societies also differed in mindset. Romans were grounded, literal, and ritualistic, believing in the virtue of shared law, civic duty, and structured life. Carthaginians were pragmatic, adaptive, and mercantile, measuring success through trade, influence, and wealth. Each observed the other from afar, their respective strengths illuminating the contrasts that would later define epic confrontations. In hindsight, the collision of these civilizations seems inevitable, yet at this moment, it was almost imperceptible, a story of rising powers unfolding slowly, like clouds drifting across a clear sky. Even as Carthage's shadow loomed, interactions between the two societies remained minimal but meaningful. Small trade missions, incidental contacts, and occasional diplomatic exchanges created an almost invisible thread connecting Rome to this maritime giant. These threads carried knowledge, experience, and warnings, lessons that Rome would absorb over decades, shaping strategies, fortifying defenses, and cultivating a mindset that balanced caution with ambition. For Carthage, Rome was a curiosity, an example of disciplined land-based growth that, if ignored, might one day become a rival difficult to dislodge. As night descends over the Italian hills, one can imagine the Republic's citizens moving through their routines, unaware of the distant city that mirrors yet contrasts with their own. Roads remain quiet, farmers rest, and the Tiber flows softly, while across the sea, Carthage's lanterns glow in orderly rows along the crescent harbor, a pulse of commerce and vigilance. This juxtaposition, calm yet pregnant with significance, lays the groundwork for a story that will unfold slowly, relentlessly, and with profound consequences. By understanding this quiet emergence, the viewer gains insight not into dramatic battles or legendary feats, but into the subtle forces of observation, comparison, and anticipation that define the earliest interactions between Rome and Carthage. These are the invisible currents, the unnoticed exchanges, and the slow brewing awareness of potential rivalry that will, in time, erupt into history's first great clash across the Mediterranean. The Punic shadow is approaching, not with immediate fire or cannon, but with the gentle, inexorable drift of history, reminding us that even the calmest seas may conceal the promise of storm. In the calm early years of Rome's growing influence, the Republic faced a challenge unlike any it had encountered before. For centuries, Roman power had been firmly grounded on land, nurtured by disciplined soldiers, organized legions, and the steady rhythm of roads and settlements. Yet now the horizon held a different kind of test. Across the waters of the western Mediterranean, Carthage had long mastered the art of naval dominance. Its fleets glided with expertise, carrying armies, merchants, and influence across vast distances. For Rome, a city built on hills and plains, the sea was unfamiliar territory, a challenge that would demand patience, ingenuity, and a quiet, unwavering resolve. The First Punic War began not with dramatic fanfare, but with necessity. The Republic's allies in Sicily faced threats from Carthaginian forces, and Rome realized that to protect its interests, it would need to command the waters. The idea of building a navy from scratch might have seemed impossible, yet Romans were nothing if not pragmatic. Shipwrights, carpenters, and engineers collaborated to produce a fleet, blending ingenuity with sheer determination. They borrowed knowledge from other maritime cultures, adapted designs, and experimented with tactics, all while maintaining the disciplined order that defined the legions on land. The process was slow and methodical, a calm reflection of Rome's capacity to adapt when confronted with new challenges. Rather than focusing on chaos or heroic duels, the story of Rome's early naval efforts emphasizes learning and resilience. Soldiers accustomed to marching across plains were now trained to navigate decks, coordinate maneuvers, and understand the rhythm of the waves. Boarding tactics, ramming strategies, and signal systems became part of a careful curriculum designed to transform land-based warriors into effective sailors. Mistakes were made, lessons were learned, and gradually the Republic began to understand the language of the sea. It was a quiet, almost meditative transformation, demonstrating how disciplined minds can adapt to unfamiliar environments without panic or haste. Meanwhile, Carthage watched Rome's efforts with a mixture of surprise and respect. The maritime power had long underestimated the land-focused republic, assuming its influence could never extend far beyond the Italian peninsula. Yet Rome's commitment to problem-solving, combined with its willingness to study and replicate, hinted at a latent strength that would prove formidable. The First Punic War, in this light, was not merely a battle of ships and soldiers. It was a meeting of approaches, a test of adaptability versus experience, and a gentle unfolding of a rivalry that would define generations. The Sicilian coastline became a quiet classroom for strategy and perseverance. Romans learned to build harbors, manage supply lines, and coordinate with allied forces, all without the drama of legendary feats dominating the narrative. Each victory, setback, and adjustment shaped the Republic's understanding of naval warfare. From modest successes to costly mistakes, the process revealed a society capable of absorbing lessons, reorganizing efficiently, and steadily improving. This was not a tale of explosions or heroic last stands, but of cumulative growth, patience, and the subtle power of learning over time. In the midst of these preparations, daily life in Rome continued with calm continuity. Citizens observed ships being constructed, families traded in markets, and the rhythm of work and ritual persisted, oblivious to the vast, slow-moving changes that were occurring. The Republic's expansion was quiet yet determined, as if the land itself was lending stability to an ambitious population learning to master forces beyond its familiar hills and plains. Each plank laid, each sail hoisted, and each maneuver practiced was part of a meditation on possibility, demonstrating that adaptation is as much about patience as it is about ingenuity. Even in distant Sicily, where the first confrontations unfolded, the focus remained on observation and strategy. Roman commanders studied Carthaginian formations, noting strengths and weaknesses. They refined their tactics carefully, emphasizing organization over chaos, discipline over bravado. The gradual evolution of Rome's naval capability became a story of collective intelligence and measured courage, showing how a young republic could overcome inherent limitations without resorting to panic or rash action. These lessons, quietly absorbed, would echo in later conflicts, influencing approaches to warfare for generations. The First Punic War also illuminated a deeper truth about Rome's character. Resilience is often invisible but profoundly powerful. Observers might have seen slow progress, hesitant maneuvers, and even early defeats, yet beneath these events lay a society growing steadily, capable of absorbing shocks, learning from errors, and building structures that would outlast any single campaign. The story invites the viewer to consider how patience, discipline, and the quiet application of knowledge can transform apparent weakness into lasting strength. Rome's naval journey was, in essence, a meditation on persistence in the face of unfamiliar challenges. By the time the Republic had established a competent fleet, the war had already taught lessons far beyond the battlefield. It revealed Rome's capacity for observation, adaptation, and innovation. Soldiers who had once feared the uncertainty of the sea now moved with confidence, navigating waters that had seemed insurmountable months before. Strategists had learned to predict, plan, and react with calm intelligence. In the gentle ebb and flow of these early campaigns, Rome discovered that the process of learning, rather than immediate triumph, could be its most powerful weapon. As night falls across the Italian hills and the Sicilian shores, the quiet narrative of the First Punic War settles into a reflective calm. There are no resounding cheers or dramatic clashes dominating the mind. Instead, there is the steady pulse of a society expanding, learning, and quietly preparing for greater challenges ahead. The young republic had faced the unknown, adapted without haste, and emerged with a subtle, enduring strength. In this calm yet deliberate transformation, the viewer is reminded that greatness often begins in small, uncelebrated moments, where patience, observation, and disciplined action converge. Rome's journey across the sea in the First Punic War is not merely a historical anecdote. It is an example of how societies grow in quiet, measured ways. It demonstrates that even the unfamiliar, when approached with determination and intelligence, can be mastered. And as the Mediterranean waters reflect the last light of day, one can almost hear the soft rhythm of learning, adaptation, and resilience, the gentle heartbeat of a republic preparing to shape the world. In the quiet dawn of the Italian hills, far from the bustling streets of Rome, the world seemed still, almost suspended in time. Yet somewhere beyond the horizon, a different kind of motion was unfolding, a journey that would stretch across mountains, valleys, and memories, leaving a mark on history without a single roar of conquest in its telling. Hannibal, a Carthaginian general whose name would echo for centuries, embarked on a path few could imagine, moving slowly but with resolute purpose, as if each step was measured against the rhythm of the earth itself. The journey began not in haste but with careful preparation. Hannibal's army, a collection of diverse soldiers, elephants, and loyal guides, stood on the edge of the known world, facing landscapes that challenged imagination as much as skill. The Alps, silent and imposing, loomed ahead like a gentle but unyielding wall. Mist clung to the craggy peaks, softening the harsh outlines of rock and ice, creating an almost dreamlike stage for what was to come. Observers might imagine chaos or fear, but the narrative here is not of panic. It is of measured endurance, of a deliberate crossing that transforms the impossible into the achievable. Elephants, those great and gentle creatures, moved slowly through the fog, their silhouettes softened by the morning light. They were not symbols of terror but of persistence, creatures that carried the weight of strategy and hope in every careful step. Soldiers followed, their movements synchronized not by command alone but by the rhythm of shared purpose. Each mile traveled was a quiet testament to human determination, a meditation on patience, planning, and the willingness to face the unknown with steady resolve. Hannibal himself is portrayed not as a storm raging through history, but as a slow-moving, deliberate force shaping events through vision and perseverance. His decisions were measured, every route carefully considered, every obstacle quietly analyzed. Crossing rivers, navigating narrow passes, and managing the well-being of his men and animals required constant attention, an almost hypnotic focus that demanded both mental and physical endurance. There was no sudden drama, only the steady unfolding of one of history's most remarkable journeys. The Alps were more than geographical obstacles, they were teachers. The army encountered ice, snow, and treacherous slopes, each step revealing the fragility of ambition against nature's scale. Yet the slow cadence of movement allowed for adaptation. Guides found safer paths, soldiers learned to conserve energy, and elephants adjusted their pace to the terrain. Every challenge became part of the story not through loud struggle, but through quiet resilience, demonstrating that persistence in the face of difficulty often has a subtler power than mere force. As the column moved, the mountains themselves seemed to watch silently. Valleys absorbed footsteps, echoes of leather boots and distant calls barely disturbing the calm air. For the viewer, the journey evokes a sense of wonder rather than fear. How a single person, guided by vision and determination, could transform the odds without haste or loud conquest. Hannibal's crossing is less about immediate impact and more about the slow accumulation of willpower, strategy, and human spirit, a lesson in endurance wrapped in the serene mist of the Alpine peaks. The journey was also an emotional landscape, not just a physical one. Soldiers faced fear, cold, and fatigue, yet they found strength in shared purpose. Elephants, massive yet docile, reflected the gentle rhythm of survival. Each step became a meditation, a quiet reflection of the human capacity to carry more than weight, to carry ambition, hope, and determination across the threshold of the impossible. Hannibal's leadership was not imposed by command alone, but by example, showing that calm resolve can inspire and sustain even in the harshest conditions. Slowly, the army descended into the valleys of northern Italy, the Alps behind them like a fading dream. The mist lifted, revealing rivers, forests, and the gentle contours of a land that awaited the unfolding story of Carthaginian ambition. The journey over the mountains had not been a dramatic conquest, but a testament to preparation, foresight, and endurance. It highlighted the subtle power of patience, the way careful planning can shape outcomes, and how a single determined individual can quietly alter the course of history. For viewers lying in the quiet of night, the image of Hannibal and his elephants moving through mist and snow becomes almost hypnotic. There is no need for immediate drama. The story itself is enough to captivate, to instill awe without alarm. The crossing of the Alps is not simply a military maneuver. It is an odyssey of quiet persistence, a slow-moving storm that reshapes the map and leaves a lasting impression without a single loud declaration. In the gentle light of reflection, one realizes that Hannibal's journey exemplifies a core truth about historical transformation. Enduring change often begins with slow, deliberate steps. It is in the careful planning, the quiet observation, and the persistent pursuit of a goal against natural obstacles that greatness is born. Hannibal did not rush, did not seek spectacle. He simply moved forward mile by mile with vision and determination, allowing history itself to be rewritten beneath his calm and deliberate presence. As night descends over the Alps and northern Italy, the story settles into the imagination of the listener. The misty mountains, the soft silhouettes of elephants, and the steady march of men serve as a reminder that endurance is often silent, yet profoundly powerful. Hannibal's Crossing is a narrative of quiet mastery over the impossible, an unfolding tale that invites the mind to wander through history with gentle curiosity, imagining each step, each breath, and each moment of resolve. In this calm, reflective journey, the viewer experiences not just a historical event, but a meditation on perseverance, strategy, and the human capacity to overcome immense challenges. The slow-moving storm that Hannibal represents is a quiet force, reminding all who listen that true power often whispers rather than shouts, and that determination can reshape the world without ever needing to disturb the peace of a quiet night. The winter of struggle seemed endless, yet in the heart of Rome, life persisted with a quiet resilience. Though Hannibal's shadow loomed over the Republic, the city did not collapse. It absorbed loss like the gentle ebb of tides against a weathered shore. Families tended to their homes, soldiers returned to rebuilding forts and roads, and the people moved forward as if each small act of continuity was a quiet defiance against the chaos around them. It was not heroics that defined this period, but patience, adaptation, and unity, the subtle forces that allow a civilization to endure when everything seems against it. Rome had learned early that survival depended on observation and adjustment. Every setback in battle became a lesson. The strategies that failed in the open fields prompted innovation in supply lines, fortifications, and troop formations. Generals who had watched Hannibal's maneuvers over the Alps now considered new ways to move armies, not faster or louder, but smarter and more deliberate. The city itself, a living organism, seemed to absorb the pressures of war, translating hardship into quiet wisdom, a lesson that victory often begins with endurance rather than aggression. The citizens, too, participated in this slow transformation. Marketplaces reopened, trade routes were cautiously reestablished, and the rhythms of daily life provided a grounding stability. Life continued amid uncertainty, a soft reminder that societies, like people, grow stronger through repeated challenges. The Republic learned to weave resilience into its culture, teaching young men and women that their strength lay not only in arms but in collective spirit, in the ability to maintain continuity when all around them threatened to unravel. Even in the darkest moments, there was observation, reflection, and careful preparation. Rome examined Hannibal's tactics, noting what made his army effective and how the Republic could respond in future engagements. Engineers and logisticians worked quietly, creating modular strategies for transport, fortification, and provisioning. Every failure was catalogued, every misstep quietly transformed into knowledge, as if the city itself had a memory that grew sharper with each trial. The narrative of Rome's endurance is not one of noise and fury, but of methodical learning, a slow rhythm that quietly reshapes the foundations of power. The war, for all its terror, became like a long winter, a season that tested stamina and character. Soldiers endured harsh campaigns, marching over rivers and through forests, observing Hannibal's every move, absorbing lessons without complaint. Local communities adapted, sharing resources, supporting displaced families, and maintaining cohesion even under the threat of invasion. Through this period, Rome's unity became a quiet force, an invisible backbone that allowed the Republic to maintain identity, purpose, and hope. The lesson was clear. Survival depended not on brilliance in a single moment, but on consistent, measured action over time. Patience, above all, became a virtue. Leaders who might have sought immediate revenge or reckless confrontation chose instead to rebuild, reassess, and prepare. Hannibal's victories, though striking, were temporary in their effect. Rome's endurance was cumulative. The Republic's ability to absorb shock, to rise slowly from each setback, transformed it from a reactive entity into a resilient organism capable of outlasting even its most cunning adversaries. Each passing season reinforced the quiet understanding that persistence often outlives aggression. At night, the city's streets and hills held an almost meditative silence. Soldiers returned to their barracks, families lit hearths, and the Tiber flowed steadily, indifferent yet life-giving. In this calm, Rome's citizens and leaders reflected not with panic but with measured attention. The lessons of the Punic conflict were slowly internalized, shaping policies, military doctrine, and civic identity. Adaptation became second nature, like the subtle movements of a tree swaying with the wind rather than resisting it, and through this quiet growth, the Republic began to transform. Observers could note that Rome's endurance was not dramatic in the traditional sense. It was not a single heroic act that defined the period, but a slow accumulation of learned wisdom, social cohesion, and strategic patience. The Republic's response to Hannibal's campaign was like the careful tending of a garden after a harsh frost, pruning, reinforcing, and nurturing growth that would later bear lasting fruit. This approach laid the groundwork for future dominance, demonstrating that empires are not only built on conquest, but also on the quiet ability to absorb and learn from adversity. Even as scouts reported distant skirmishes and Hannibal continued to move unpredictably, the narrative of Rome remained centered on adaptation rather than panic. Citizens and soldiers alike discovered that unity was more powerful than fear, that resilience could turn temporary setbacks into long-term advantage. Each rebuilt road, each fortified town, and each carefully planned campaign reflected a republic quietly consolidating knowledge and resources, preparing not for a single decisive victory, but for sustained success over decades to come. By the time Hannibal eventually withdrew from the Italian peninsula, Rome had emerged transformed. The city and the republic it represented had learned to endure, to absorb loss without fracture, and to grow stronger through reflection and planning. What might have seemed a desperate winter became a formative season, instilling a patience and cohesion that would define Rome for generations. Observers could see that the true strength of the Republic lay not in individual brilliance or fleeting victories, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of persistence that carried it forward through hardship and uncertainty. For viewers lying in the calm of night, this section becomes a meditation on endurance. Rome's story is not one of explosive heroism, but of quiet wisdom, of learning to move forward even when the world seems hostile. The narrative encourages reflection, drawing attention to the subtle ways societies survive, adapt, and prepare for the future. The lesson lingers long after the words fade. True power is often found in patience, resilience, and the ability to endure without losing sight of purpose or identity. As the night deepens and listeners drift closer to sleep, the image of Rome, steady and learning amid the challenges of war, offers both comfort and awe. Hannibal's shadow may have passed, but the Republic's quiet strength endures, a testament to the power of unity, adaptation, and the long, gentle process of becoming dominant, not through force alone, but through the slow accumulation of wisdom and resilience. The Mediterranean, once a patchwork of independent cities, islands, and distant shores, slowly began to feel the subtle, steady presence of Rome. The Republic, which had started as a cluster of settlements along the Tiber, now cast a gentle influence over lands it had only recently imagined in distant campaigns. This expansion did not announce itself with fanfare or ceaseless battle. Instead, it unfolded quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a tide washing across countless coastlines. Towns and ports that once seemed distant now carried Roman coins, Roman laws, and Roman merchants, blending cultures together in ways that were both practical and soothing in their predictability. Trade became the lifeblood of this growing influence. Ships glided across calm waters carrying grain from North Africa, olive oil from Hispania, and wine from distant Greek colonies. Each journey, though fraught with natural challenges, was part of a soft rhythm that connected disparate peoples. Markets hummed with quiet energy as Roman and local merchants exchanged not just goods, but knowledge, customs, and ideas. In this gentle interweaving of cultures, the Republic's influence expanded further than armies alone could ever reach. The Mediterranean was becoming a shared space, a network of interdependence subtly knit together by Rome's presence. With expansion came a careful administration, though still understated. Governors oversaw provinces not as tyrants but as organizers, aligning taxes, law, and infrastructure to maintain order without breaking the natural flow of life. Roads, harbors, and aqueducts were built not as monuments to conquest, but as practical instruments to support commerce and communication. The local populations, often wary at first, gradually adapted to these new systems. Roman culture intertwined with existing customs, producing a slow, almost imperceptible evolution of identity across the Mediterranean. Rome was present in every port and field, yet never so overbearing as to overshadow the gentle pulse of everyday life. Ideas traveled as freely as goods. Greek philosophers conversed with Roman thinkers. Egyptian mathematicians found attentive students in the city of Rome. Religious beliefs mingled, festivals borrowed elements from neighboring cultures, and artisans found inspiration in the blending of techniques. The Republic's expansion was less about domination in the dramatic sense and more about integration, a subtle softening of boundaries that quietly consolidated power. Each new province added not just land, but knowledge, tradition, and resource, shaping the Republic into something far larger than any one city could have imagined. The Republic's influence was also felt in the calm spread of Roman law. Rules that had once applied only to a handful of settlements now provided structure across the Mediterranean. Disputes were mediated, trade was regulated, and citizens found a predictable framework within which to live their lives. The legal system moved like a gentle tide, providing security without the need for constant enforcement. In this soft expansion, Rome did not just conquer land. It offered a system that encouraged cohesion, weaving disparate communities into a tapestry of shared expectation and quiet stability. Yet even as Rome's presence extended, the Republic remained conscious of the delicate balance required to maintain harmony. Military garrisons were stationed thoughtfully, not to dominate but to support stability. Roads and communication lines ensured that help could reach distant provinces, and officials were trained to listen as well as enforce. Rome's growth was gradual, almost invisible from day to day, but cumulative in its effect. By the time a new citizen walked along a Mediterranean quay, they might have noticed Roman influence everywhere without realizing that a republic had become a near-world power. This gentle dominance extended to culture, too. Theater, art, and literature traveled along trade routes, carrying ideas that entertained, educated, and inspired. Schools and forums spread slowly, creating a common understanding among educated citizens and elites alike. The Mediterranean became a shared stage where local traditions and Roman influence danced together, neither entirely overshadowing the other, but blending into a calm, unified experience. Observers could see that Rome's quiet power was as much about persuasion, culture, and organization as it was about armies. Even the natural rhythm of life seemed to acknowledge Rome's influence. Farmers adjusted planting cycles to meet the needs of distant markets. Craftsmen honed skills for trade beyond their immediate village, and sailors navigated with the understanding that the Republic's reach was present in every port. The Mediterranean, once a space of isolated communities, was now a connected network of economic, cultural, and social exchange. Rome's expansion was gentle yet profound, like a stream gradually widening into a river that nourished everything along its banks. In this period of calm growth, the Republic's true strength became apparent. It was not in sudden conquests or spectacular victories, but in the ability to integrate, adapt, and maintain cohesion across vast distances. The Mediterranean was slowly becoming Roman not through domination alone, but through the soft weaving together of commerce, culture, law, and daily life. Each connection, each trade route, and each shared idea strengthened the Republic's position, allowing it to expand influence without the chaos that might have accompanied a more forceful approach. For listeners drifting in the quiet of night, this narrative offers a sense of steady progression. Rome's expansion is presented as a gentle unfolding, a world gradually becoming interconnected under the Republic's presence. The calm, measured pace invites reflection, allowing viewers to imagine distant shores linked by trade, ideas, and shared systems of life. It is a meditation on the subtle power of integration and the enduring strength that comes from patience, observation, and unity. By the end of this period, the Mediterranean no longer felt like a collection of distant, disconnected lands. The Republic's influence, though unobtrusive, was unmistakable. Trade, culture, and law moved across seas and plains alike, quietly uniting a vast and diverse region. Rome had become a subtle world power, not through the noise of constant conquest, but through the steady accumulation of influence, organization, and integration. The calm, persistent presence of the Republic was a testament to the power of quiet, deliberate expansion, a lesson in endurance and cohesion that would shape the coming centuries. Even as Rome's reach extended across the Mediterranean, a quiet pressure began to build within the city itself. The streets of the Forum and the hills surrounding the Tiber whispered of subtle frictions, not loud upheavals. Citizens noticed that the Republic, which had once felt intimate and manageable, now contained a growing complexity that stretched its structures thin. Differences between the wealthy elite and ordinary plebeians, once easy to navigate, became sharper, forming invisible divides that influenced daily life. These tensions were not explosive. They were more like a slow-moving current under a placid surface, quietly shaping the character of the city. The patricians, heirs to Rome's oldest traditions, began to consolidate land and wealth with a quiet but deliberate efficiency. Their villas, often shaded by olive trees and overlooking gentle gardens, stood in contrast to the crowded insulae where plebeians lived. These distinctions were noticed by all, but rarely addressed directly. The wealthiest citizens controlled the Senate, setting policies that favored their interests, while the plebeians, bound by tradition and custom, felt the strain of an expanding economy that increasingly excluded them. This quiet imbalance did not produce immediate conflict, but it created an undercurrent of unease, a subtle tension threading through public spaces and private homes alike. At the same time, the Republic's political mechanisms, designed for a smaller, more cohesive city, began to creak under the weight of expansion. The Senate, once composed of men intimately familiar with one another, now had to navigate the complexities of distant provinces, overseas trade, and growing military commitments. Decisions that had once flowed smoothly now required delicate negotiation, compromise, and sometimes quiet coercion. Ambitious politicians tested these boundaries, seeking influence through alliances and promises rather than brute force. Their maneuvers were soft-spoken, almost imperceptible, yet they contributed to a slow reshaping of the political landscape. Economic inequality was mirrored in everyday life. Grain distributions, once predictable, now varied depending on political favor. Merchants, enriched by Mediterranean trade, found new opportunities, while small farmers struggled to compete. Even as the city buzzed with quiet energy, some citizens felt an invisible pressure, a sense that the Republic's system, though carefully constructed, was being stretched to its limits. These pressures did not erupt dramatically in the streets at first. They manifested in murmurs, complaints at local assemblies, and cautious debates behind closed doors. For the late-night listener, this is a world of subtle signals, where history moves like a slow, patient tide rather than a violent storm. Social divisions were not only economic, but also cultural. Citizens returning from distant provinces brought stories of foreign lands, new customs, and unfamiliar practices. The patrician class sometimes embraced these changes selectively, integrating exotic goods and ideas into their private lives, while the plebeians often saw these transformations as distant, abstract, and sometimes threatening. The tension between innovation and tradition became a quiet dance, each step measured, each adjustment deliberate. This interplay of continuity and change contributed to the Republic's unique character, a civilization negotiating its identity in the shadows of its own success. Yet amidst these subtle pressures, Rome retained a remarkable sense of resilience. Public rituals, religious ceremonies, and festivals acted as gentle reminders of shared identity. Citizens gathered in the forum not to clash, but to reaffirm common bonds, to participate in traditions that had weathered generations. These practices softened the edges of inequality and quieted the growing dissonance, offering a kind of social glue that held the Republic together even as internal tensions whispered along every street and hill. Military service also reflected these quiet strains. Soldiers returning from campaigns brought back both wealth and stories, reinforcing the growing contrast between those who had access to opportunity and those who remained in obscurity. Ambitious commanders quietly leveraged their victories for political influence, reshaping public opinion in subtle ways. Each small triumph, each carefully crafted speech in the Senate, nudged the Republic's structure, testing the elasticity of its foundations. The Republic grew, and with growth came the invisible creaking of a system under pressure. Legal reforms emerged as a calm response to these pressures. Plebeians sought protections and rights, petitioned for changes in land distribution, and advocated for codified laws that could restrain the overreach of the elite. The Senate listened, negotiated, and sometimes compromised, weaving small patches into the fabric of governance. These adjustments were gentle rather than revolutionary, like careful stitches holding together a garment that was beginning to fray at the seams. For the late-night listener, this process demonstrates how a civilization can evolve slowly in response to internal pressures, maintaining cohesion without dramatic eruptions. Cultural life mirrored the same quiet evolution. Literature, theater, and philosophy reflected the debates and dilemmas of the time, offering perspectives on justice, duty, and the common good. Writers pondered the nature of inequality and ambition. Playwrights depicted subtle conflicts within households and communities. These creations circulated among citizens, shaping thought in a soft, reflective manner. The Republic's internal tensions were thus mirrored not just in politics and economy, but in the shared imagination of its people, creating a layered and nuanced social experience. By the end of this period, the Republic had matured into a complex, interconnected system. The Mediterranean trade network, political assemblies, and social hierarchies now formed a delicate ecosystem. Rome's greatness was evident, yet it carried within it quiet strains that demanded attention. Citizens moved through streets that were bustling yet measured, aware that the Republic's fabric was resilient but not invulnerable. These internal pressures, though subtle, would slowly guide the evolution of Rome, preparing the stage for future reforms, conflicts, and transformations. For those listening late at night, this chapter offers a gentle reflection on the nature of growth and strain. Rome's internal tensions are not a dramatic clamor. They are whispers, soft indicators of a system adapting to its own success. The story invites the audience to imagine the quiet complexity of daily life in a rising power, to notice the subtleties of influence, and to drift into contemplation of how even the greatest civilizations must balance ambition with equilibrium. It is in these whispers, soft but persistent, that the Republic's resilience and vulnerability both reside, quietly shaping the course of history. In the quiet corridors of Rome's Forum, a gentle tension began to stir, carrying with it the hope of change and the echo of whispered debates. Two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, emerged in this moment not as warriors with swords, but as men armed with vision and a desire to reshape their society. They looked upon the Republic with discerning eyes, noticing the growing inequalities between the patrician elite and the common citizens, the plebeians, whose labor and loyalty had sustained Rome for generations. Their mission was not to conquer new lands or command armies, but to bring balance, fairness, and opportunity back into the city. Yet, as history quietly reminds us, ideals often encounter resistance in the most entrenched systems. Tiberius, the elder of the two, began with a simple yet bold proposal: to redistribute public land that had been quietly claimed and concentrated by the wealthiest citizens. His words, though spoken softly in public assemblies, carried weight beyond the chamber walls. He appealed to justice, the ancient duty of citizens, and the shared traditions that bound Rome together. The citizens listened with curiosity and cautious hope. Yet beneath the calm deliberation, opposition brewed. The patrician class, accustomed to unchecked influence, saw their privileges threatened. Their resistance was measured, strategic, and relentless, a quiet counterforce to Tiberius's passionate idealism. The conflict that unfolded was not a thunderous battle, but a subtle struggle of wills and ideas. Political maneuvers, alliances, and public persuasion became the instruments of change, and the tension hung in the air like a dense mist over the Tiber at dawn. Tiberius, steadfast in his purpose, navigated these currents with determination, knowing that even small shifts could ripple through the Republic's structures. Yet, as he pressed forward, the resistance escalated. Compromises failed, and the simmering unrest within the city quietly erupted. Tiberius's vision, though noble, collided with the inertia of tradition and the protective instincts of those in power, leading to a tragedy that would echo through Roman memory. His death, abrupt and shocking, yet described in hushed tones by chroniclers. Gaius Gracchus, years later, inherited not only the ideals of his brother but the fragile tension that remained unresolved. He approached reform with a measured patience, seeking to expand citizenship, regulate grain distribution, and provide broader access to public office. Each proposal was an intricate thread in a delicate fabric, intended to weave the Republic closer to equity. The people, particularly the urban poor, listened with quiet gratitude, their hopes stirred by the promise of inclusion. Yet the patrician opposition, now more seasoned and wary, met Gaius with calculated strategies, undermining initiatives through law, debate, and public influence. The struggle was a silent duel of ideals and interests, an emotional tug-of-war played out in assemblies, streets, and marketplaces. Gaius's fate mirrored that of his brother. Despite careful planning and broad popular support, his reforms faced insurmountable pressures from entrenched power. The city, which had once been a cradle of civic pride and balance, seemed to shift beneath his feet. Violence, subtle and then more direct, claimed him as it had claimed Tiberius, leaving the dream of reform suspended between hope and despair. Yet the story of the Gracchi was not only about failure. It was about the enduring spirit of those who see inequity and attempt to correct it. Their lives became a reflective mirror for the Republic, showing how even gentle, well-intentioned efforts can illuminate cracks in a great system. For the nighttime listener, this chapter unfolds with an emotional calmness. There are no clashing swords or roaring crowds. Instead, there is a sense of intimate observation, of walking through the streets of Rome and feeling the silent weight of civic struggle. The Gracchi's story encourages reflection on the fragile balance between ideals and power, between ambition and tradition. It demonstrates that even in a society famed for conquest and expansion, the quiet internal battles, the moral, social, and political tensions, shape the course of history in subtle but profound ways. The narrative also offers an unhurried exploration of cause and consequence. Tiberius and Gaius challenged assumptions, introduced reforms, and attempted to pull the Republic toward equity. Each act, each speech, each negotiation contributed to a slow, almost imperceptible reshaping of public consciousness. Citizens began to question privilege, to reconsider their obligations, and to imagine a society where justice might extend beyond the powerful few. This process, although quiet, sowed seeds for future leaders and thinkers who would grapple with the tension between reform and authority, continuity and change. Yet the underlying lesson of the Gracchi era is gentle but clear. Idealism alone cannot reshape entrenched systems. Rome's structures were resilient, layered with centuries of tradition, obligation, and precedent. Efforts to alter them, however noble, faced inertia that could not be overcome without extraordinary circumstance. The Gracchi's story thus becomes a meditation on patience, foresight, and the often painful friction between vision and reality. Their legacy, whispered through time, reminds the listener that change is possible, but it requires not only courage but also strategy, timing, and endurance. By the end of this section, the viewer drifts from the quiet struggles of reform to the subtle emergence of a new era, the age of military strongmen. The Republic, tested by internal pressures and the collision of ideals, stands on the cusp of transformation. The soft tension cultivated here foreshadows the next phase, where ambition and authority will become inseparable from Rome's expansion and the eventual rise of its most famous leaders. For those lying in bed, the story is both soothing and thought-provoking, a gentle narrative of courage, compromise, and the quiet costs of idealism in the unfolding drama of Rome. In the quiet streets and marble forums of Rome, power was shifting like the slow movement of tides, almost imperceptible but unstoppable. Two men, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, emerged in this period not as mere generals, but as architects of a subtle transformation. They were born of the Republic's traditions, yet they carried visions that challenged its old balance. Marius, rising from modest beginnings, redefined military service, opening the legions to the landless citizens, a move that quietly altered loyalty and allegiance. Soldiers no longer served only the state. They began to see their commander as the protector of their futures, a gentle but profound change that would ripple through Roman society for decades. Sulla, older and patrician by birth, observed the Republic's drift with a measured precision. While Marius built loyalty through opportunity, Sulla built loyalty through lineage, prestige, and the careful cultivation of influence within the Senate. Their paths were different, yet convergent, both pulling at the Republic's fragile structure. The tension between them was not a roar of immediate conflict, but a series of decisions, reforms, and political maneuvers that quietly set the stage for civil discord. Observers in the streets might have felt the subtle shift, like a breeze hinting at an approaching storm, unaware that the winds of change were already shaping the destiny of Rome. Marius's reforms, though practical, were revolutionary in effect. By allowing the landless to enlist, he transformed the army into a professional force, disciplined and loyal, but increasingly tied to personal ambition. The young men who marched under his banner were not just citizens of Rome, they were also followers of Marius himself. This development, while seemingly beneficial to the Republic's military strength, planted the seeds for future upheaval. Civil authority began to compete with military loyalty, and the Republic's traditional systems of checks and balances subtly shifted. Listeners lying in the quiet of night can imagine the silent streets of Rome as these decisions settled into place, the city unaware of the slow evolution happening in its armies. Sulla, by contrast, approached power with the patience and calculation of one accustomed to privilege. He watched the Republic's institutions, noting the friction and ambitions that Marius's rise had stirred. In response, he leaned into tradition and formal authority, asserting the Senate's supremacy, yet also demonstrating that personal ambition could wield the old systems for new ends. When civil war finally arrived, it was not a chaotic storm but the result of years of tension, careful planning, and accumulated discontent. Sulla's march on Rome was unprecedented yet deliberate, a reminder that power could be taken quietly, decisively, and permanently. The rivalry between Marius and Sulla illustrates a fundamental tension in Rome's evolution. Both men were loyal in intent to the Republic, yet their methods revealed its vulnerabilities. Marius showed how innovation and populism could shift structures from within. Sulla demonstrated that tradition, combined with decisive force, could reshape authority. For the nighttime listener, this is not a tale of shouting generals or clashing swords, but of slow currents, where choices, reforms, and personal loyalties quietly bend the flow of history. It is the tension between old and new, between civic duty and personal allegiance, that makes this period compelling even as the narration soothes the mind. As their rivalry unfolded, Rome itself became a mirror for these competing visions. Citizens, senators, and soldiers alike were drawn into the subtle drama. Streets once familiar became scenes of negotiation, whispered plots, and quiet demonstrations of force. Marius and Sulla's choices sent ripples through everyday life, affecting farmers, merchants, and urban dwellers alike. Each reform, each military decision, was like a stone dropped into the Republic's pond, sending expanding circles of consequence that few could fully perceive in real time. This slow, almost dreamlike cascade of events forms the heart of their story, emphasizing the emotional resonance of change without ever needing spectacle. By the time Sulla assumed the dictatorship, the Republic had already been subtly transformed. The balance between citizen, army, and state had shifted, tilting toward the extraordinary power of individuals. Yet even as the city settled into uneasy quiet after civil conflict, the seeds planted by both Marius and Sulla promised further unrest. Loyalty had shifted from abstract civic duty to tangible personal bonds. Authority had expanded from institutional guidance to the will of determined men. For the listener, there is a calm, almost hypnotic rhythm to these transitions. The city sleeps, the Tiber glistens under moonlight, and history flows forward quietly, inexorably, toward the era of Julius Caesar. Ultimately, the tale of Marius and Sulla is a meditation on the fragility of systems when confronted by human ambition. It is about the gentle, almost invisible transformations that can accumulate into monumental change. For late-night viewers, it is soothing to trace these subtle currents, to watch the Republic bend under invisible forces, and to recognize that history is shaped as much by quiet decisions as by dramatic events. Their story prepares the mind to understand the inevitability of Caesar, the next figure in Rome's journey, whose rise will feel both natural and startling, a continuation of trends that began long before his birth. Through the calm exploration of reforms, civil maneuvering, and the slow drift from republican ideals to personal power, this section allows the listener to absorb the complexity without tension. It is a quiet reflection on strategy, loyalty, and the consequences of choice, guiding the audience gently toward the understanding of Rome's eventual transformation. Marius and Sulla, through their parallel paths, demonstrate that even the mightiest system can shift under subtle pressures, and that sometimes the quietest changes resonate farthest into the future. In the warm, flickering light of a Roman evening, a young man named Julius Caesar moved quietly through the streets, his mind already traveling far beyond the Tiber's gentle flow. Born into patrician heritage, he carried the weight of tradition, yet his spirit yearned for something more. The Republic, though grand in its history, felt fractured, its systems creaking under pressure, its Senate hesitant to act. For Caesar, the city's subtle unrest was not chaos, but opportunity, an invitation to carve a path through the quiet corridors of influence. Each step he took, each carefully chosen alliance, was measured and intentional, like the soft yet determined flow of a river shaping the land it touched. Caesar's rise was not sudden. It unfolded like a gentle tide, imperceptible to many, but impossible to ignore in retrospect. Early roles in administration, military campaigns in distant lands, and eloquent speeches in the Forum all contributed to a slow accumulation of trust, respect, and influence. His intelligence was paired with patience, his ambition tempered by understanding of timing. Listeners lying in the calm of night can picture him reviewing maps under candlelight, thinking of faraway Gaul, imagining the rhythm of armies and cities while the city around him slept. It is a meditation on foresight, on quiet preparation, and on the almost imperceptible steps that precede monumental change. The Gallic campaigns, often told in history as conquest and strategy, can here be imagined as a series of quiet challenges. Rivers crossed, fortresses approached, and wintered camps became exercises in endurance, both for men and mind. Caesar learned the subtle power of loyalty, the way trust could bind soldiers to a commander as strongly as law bound them to a republic. Night after night, he wrote letters, sent reports, and observed the world through careful eyes. There was no spectacle in these moments, only the slow, steady shaping of authority, a quiet crescendo that would eventually ripple back to Rome with force unseen, yet inevitable. Back in the city, the Republic's institutions strained under pressure. Political factions whispered and maneuvered, ambitious men watched each other cautiously, and the people carried on with everyday life, unaware that history itself was about to tilt. Caesar, observing from afar and preparing from within, understood that change could be both gentle and irreversible. It is here that the listener can dwell on the paradox of power, how the quietest decisions, the smallest calculated risks, can echo across centuries. The crossing of the Rubicon, though now immortalized, was in Caesar's mind a simple step, a line between past and future, ordinary and extraordinary, hesitation and resolve. The Rubicon itself, a narrow, shimmering ribbon of water, presents an almost hypnotic image in this quiet narrative. Imagine the chill in the air, the soft murmur of the river, the gleam of armor under early morning light. Caesar, with measured breaths, knew that stepping beyond this point meant leaving behind one world for another. There was no fanfare, no cheering crowds, just the gentle, solemn understanding of a man aware that destiny lay beyond a simple bank of water. His soldiers followed, calm yet loyal, trusting the subtle force of leadership more than orders alone. The moment is almost a meditation, a gentle pause before the unfolding of irrevocable events. In reflecting on Caesar's mind, one senses the balance of intellect and emotion, of ambition and awareness. He considered the consequences not with panic but with thoughtful foresight. Each step toward Rome was a measured negotiation with history itself. The streets once familiar became part of a new mental map, an inner city of decisions, loyalties, and strategies that would guide him and his republic-altering vision. The audience, listening in a darkened room or under the comfort of blankets, can feel the quiet tension that never rises to chaos, yet carries immense weight, a gentle buildup of inevitability that invites reflection. This section is also a study in human perception. How does a man perceive power before he seizes it? Caesar's contemplation illustrates the subtle psychology of leadership, awareness of risks, understanding of allies and adversaries, and a recognition of the fragility of institutions. For the nighttime listener, it is soothing to witness the thoughtfulness behind decisive action, to follow a mind that moves not with panic, but with careful, patient precision. There is a calm rhythm to his planning, almost like a slow river eroding stone over centuries, reshaping the landscape without forceful display. By the time Caesar approached Rome, the calm before the crossing had deepened into quiet certainty. He had prepared, observed, and measured every detail. The Republic, though proud, could not contain the momentum he had cultivated. Crossing the Rubicon was simultaneously simple and monumental, a soft step into history that would forever alter the Republic's trajectory. The narrative here is not of shouting or battle, but of the slow, reflective power of decision, showing listeners that the mightiest changes often begin with a quiet, thoughtful moment. Ultimately, this portrayal of Caesar is one of introspection and subtle influence. The audience can drift into sleep while following his quiet strategies, imagining the world as it balanced on the cusp of transformation. There is no need for dramatic interruption. The story itself carries both tension and serenity. Through calm storytelling, the listener experiences history not as a series of battles, but as a sequence of careful, intentional steps, each one echoing across time, each one shaping the course of Rome with gentle inevitability. The calm before Caesar's crossing reminds us that history is rarely immediate spectacle. It is often the quiet alignment of ambition, intellect, and circumstance. For those seeking relaxation and engagement simultaneously, this section offers the perfect balance. A mind at work, a river at rest, a city asleep, and the gentle whisper of destiny unfolding one deliberate step at a time. The fall of the Republic, though looming, begins not with noise, but with the serene calculations of a man prepared to change the world forever. The Roman Republic, after centuries of cautious growth, careful governance, and slow accumulation of wisdom, found itself in a quiet storm. The streets of Rome were no longer merely thoroughfares for daily life. They carried the weight of history, whispered conversations, and subtle tensions that few noticed yet all felt. Julius Caesar, whose calm ambition had already reshaped much of the Republic's landscape, now held power like a gentle but inevitable tide, washing over old structures and leaving new patterns behind. The city seemed suspended in time, as if holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Caesar's rise to dictatorship was not sudden to those who observed the currents carefully. The Senate, divided and weary, had little capacity to resist a man who combined intellect, charm, and the quiet authority of experience. His reforms, though far-reaching, were carried out with calm purpose rather than forceful spectacle. Roads were built, debts restructured, grain distributions ensured, and distant provinces were subtly integrated into a coherent system. From the perspective of a late-night listener, the Republic did not collapse in shouts or flames. It ebbed and shifted under careful management, like a river reshaping its banks during a long, slow flood. Even as Caesar governed, murmurs of dissent began to rise, faint but persistent. Senators who still clung to old ideals whispered in the shadows, plotting and questioning whether Rome's cherished traditions could survive in the presence of concentrated authority. The tension was never dramatic in the streets. It existed in gestures, glances, and the meticulous crafting of speeches. For the listener, it becomes clear that power can accumulate quietly, and that what appears calm on the surface often conceals deep currents of unease. The Republic's foundations, built over centuries, were being tested not by armies, but by ideas and ambitions that outpaced institutional patience. The day of Caesar's assassination, though steeped in infamy, can be imagined as a moment of surreal quiet. The Senate, a familiar chamber bathed in marble and sunlight, witnessed history's quietest thunder. Friends, colleagues, and conspirators moved with the calm deliberation of men who believed they were preserving order. The act itself, though violent, was not accompanied by citywide panic. Rome continued almost gently to breathe and carry on. For the nighttime listener, this scene is less about horror and more about reflection. A system faltering under the weight of its own contradictions and the inevitability of change that no single act could halt. In the aftermath, the Republic did not immediately crumble in visible chaos. Instead, it wavered, like a candle flickering in a gentle breeze. Caesar's death left both a vacuum and a question. Could a system so carefully designed yet so rigidly bound by tradition adapt to the new realities of power? The streets, once silent witnesses to daily life, now carried the quiet footfalls of generals, politicians, and citizens navigating uncertainty. Loyalty shifted subtly, alliances formed and dissolved in whispers, and the Senate itself seemed like an echo of a world that had passed. For listeners lying in bed, the scene evokes a sense of quiet tension, not alarms, a storm felt in the air rather than seen in flames. The rise of the Second Triumvirate, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, was another calm wave in this slow-moving tide of transformation. Each figure carried ambition tempered by caution, seeking to consolidate control without igniting overt chaos. Civil wars, though historically intense, can be portrayed as distant echoes, unfolding in landscapes beyond immediate view, affecting distant lands while Rome itself hummed with measured anxiety. This approach allows the audience to absorb the gravity of events without the overstimulation of dramatized battle, making it easier to drift into reflective engagement while listening. The Republic's final struggles were not violent spectacles, but subtle tests of endurance. Laws, traditions, and institutions that once seemed immutable bent under pressure, revealing the delicate balance between order and adaptability. Citizens, soldiers, and senators alike moved through daily life, negotiating loyalties and witnessing a system that could no longer entirely govern itself. For reflective history lovers, this phase is particularly compelling. It emphasizes the human, institutional, and philosophical dimensions of collapse rather than sensational conflict. Even as Octavian emerged, setting the stage for what would become the empire, Rome itself seemed to exhale, letting centuries of republican governance settle into memory. The story of the Republic's final breath is not loud. It is a meditation on transition, on how one system gracefully, quietly gives way to another. Listeners can imagine walking through the Forum at dawn, the columns casting long shadows, the city carrying both pride and weariness, feeling the echo of centuries while standing on the threshold of a new era. Through calm narration, the audience perceives the Republic not as a dramatic casualty, but as a living system that reached its natural limits. Its contradictions, the tension between shared governance and personal ambition, the friction between tradition and necessity, are presented as gentle lessons for the mind to ponder. The fall of the Republic is, therefore, both an ending and a prelude, a quiet invitation to consider the cyclical nature of history and the inevitability of transformation. Finally, the section guides the listener's thoughts toward anticipation without urgency. Augustus, the first emperor, waits on the horizon like the soft glow of dawn. The Republic, exhausted but dignified, makes space for a new order. The narration's serene tone ensures that the audience remains both curious and relaxed, ready to follow history's next step without distraction or agitation. The gentle rhythm of events, the patient unfolding of outcomes, and the reflective pacing all work together to create a hypnotic yet informative experience, a perfect balance for those seeking to drift into sleep while absorbing the story of Rome's transition. As the chapter closes, the listener is left with a profound sense of calm and contemplation. The Republic, with all its achievements, trials, and contradictions, has breathed its last in quiet dignity. Its lessons linger, whispered in marble corridors and the gentle rustle of leaves along the Tiber. And as the narrative prepares to turn toward Augustus, there is no need for haste, only a peaceful curiosity, allowing the mind to follow history's soft, unbroken flow into the age of empire. After centuries of struggle, civil war, and quiet upheaval, Rome finally exhaled. The streets that had once carried the weight of rival armies now felt a gentle rhythm again. Citizens, soldiers, and senators, long accustomed to uncertainty, began to sense a subtle calm settling over the city. Octavian, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar, moved through this world with a quiet determination. Not as a conqueror screaming orders, but as a careful architect of transition, he envisioned a Rome restored, balanced, orderly, and ready to thrive under a new form of leadership. For the listener lying in bed, this is the soft arrival of stability after a long, restless night. Octavian's rise was methodical. He navigated the intricate networks of loyalty and suspicion with care, avoiding dramatic confrontation where possible. The second triumvirate, his alliance with Mark Antony and Lepidus, had secured his path, yet he knew that the delicate structures of the Republic required subtle adjustment. Each decision he made, from military positioning to political appointments, was a step in a slow, deliberate dance, reshaping power quietly rather than with sudden upheaval. The audience can imagine Rome's hills and forums bathed in the soft morning light, as whispers of negotiation and strategy rippled gently through the marble columns. The transition from Octavian to Augustus is a story told not in battle cries but in patience, diplomacy, and foresight. He redefined authority with careful language, presenting himself not as a ruler above the people, but as a steward of Rome's enduring traditions. Citizens gradually accepted his reforms because they were framed as restoration rather than revolution. Roads were maintained, grain distribution stabilized, and public works beautified the city, giving visible, soothing signs that order had returned. For nighttime listeners, the emphasis is not on power as spectacle, but on power as quiet, purposeful organization. One of Augustus's most remarkable achievements was the creation of a new governmental structure that balanced tradition with innovation. The Senate, though no longer absolute, remained respected. Magistrates continued to serve, and laws were preserved, yet Augustus held the ultimate authority with calm discretion. This careful balance reassured a population weary of chaos. The gentle narrative emphasizes that authority does not always need to roar to be effective. Sometimes it works best as a silent, steady current guiding society forward. The mind of the listener is invited to wander through this atmosphere of measured control, feeling the serenity of a world slowly healing. The city itself reflected this calm. Rome's streets, once echoing with uncertainty, now hummed with purposeful activity. Trade resumed with quiet efficiency, the markets buzzed softly with commerce, and the Tiber reflected the slow rise of dawn over orderly neighborhoods. Public buildings, temples, and forums were maintained and improved, symbolizing continuity and reassurance. For a listener drifting toward sleep, these images serve as gentle anchors, creating a sense of safety, stability, and the quiet satisfaction of a city restored. Augustus also recognized the human element in governing an empire. He encouraged loyalty not by fear, but by subtle recognition and inclusion. Soldiers were rewarded, veterans settled with land, and civic leaders were incorporated into the renewed system. Families, merchants, and citizens experienced calm prosperity, knowing that the tides of civil war had receded and that the city's pulse had stabilized. Through this, the audience senses a world where authority does not oppress but nurtures, a lesson in leadership as gentle as it is enduring. Even as peace settled over Rome, Augustus remained attentive to the quiet challenges of governance. External threats were managed carefully, and diplomacy with neighboring states was conducted with precision rather than haste. He expanded Rome's influence without forcing dramatic confrontation, allowing the Republic's former territories to feel continuity rather than conquest. The narration presents this subtle expansion as a gentle unfolding, like a flower opening with patience and grace, reinforcing the calm, hypnotic rhythm essential for late-night engagement. In private moments, Augustus reflected on the long shadows cast by the Republic. He understood that history's weight rested upon his shoulders, and that his role was not simply to rule, but to safeguard centuries of accumulated wisdom. The narrative invites listeners to imagine him walking quietly through the palaces and gardens of Rome, considering how best to harmonize tradition with innovation. This contemplative perspective encourages deep reflection, offering a soothing bridge between curiosity and relaxation. The crowning moment of Octavian's transformation into Augustus is less a ceremony and more a subtle shift in perception. The people, Senate, and army gradually recognized him as Rome's first emperor, not through a single dramatic proclamation but through steady, consistent action. Trust was earned silently, authority consolidated carefully, and the foundations for an era of enduring peace were laid without fanfare. For listeners seeking both knowledge and calm, this moment illustrates the power of patience and subtlety in shaping history. By the end of this section, the audience feels the full weight of transition without tension. Rome, weary but resilient, has moved from centuries of civil strife into a new era of quiet dominance. Augustus embodies the balance of tradition and innovation, guiding the Republic's legacy into the empire with calm wisdom. Listeners can imagine the Tiber's reflection, the organized streets, and the serene authority of a leader whose strength lies in foresight, not force. The story gently sets the stage for the empire's unfolding, preparing the mind for further journeys through history while encouraging rest, reflection, and ease. After decades of turbulence, Rome finally entered a period of calm that would last for generations. The streets of the city, once echoing with the tension of civil war and political upheaval, now carried only the gentle rhythm of daily life. Merchants unloaded goods with quiet efficiency, and the chatter of citizens blended softly with the distant hum of the Tiber River. The empire's far-flung provinces, from the sunlit hills of Hispania to the fertile plains of Egypt, experienced a similar tranquility. Roads stretched across continents like calm, connecting people and ideas in a subtle, reassuring network. For a listener resting in bed, this is the slow, soothing pulse of a world finally learning to breathe. Rome's vast system of roads deserves particular attention, not for their engineering feats, but for the quiet ways they linked civilization. They allowed merchants to travel safely, armies to move steadily without fear, and cultures to intertwine gently over centuries. Villages and towns along these arteries thrived quietly, markets humming, artisans at work, children running along cobbled streets. The empire's infrastructure functioned like a steady heartbeat, reassuring all who lived within its bounds that, for the moment, the world was at ease. The mind of the listener can drift along these roads, imagining endless horizons of stability and continuity. Trade became a serene, almost poetic flow during this era. Grain from Egypt arrived calmly in Rome, while olive oil, wine, and crafted goods moved along well-tended routes. Ships glided across the Mediterranean like soft shadows, their sails catching the wind with ease rather than urgency. Cities along the coasts and rivers flourished quietly, their markets open from dawn to dusk, their fountains whispering as they spilled water into sunlit plazas. For those lying in bed, these images provide a visual lullaby. Commerce without chaos, abundance without alarm, the subtle weaving together of a vast and enduring world. The people of the empire experienced peace not as a dramatic gift, but as a gentle certainty. Families could walk safely through streets at twilight, festivals occurred without interruption, and the arts flourished softly in the background. Poetry, sculpture, and architecture thrived under this calm, creating an atmosphere that was as intellectually nourishing as it was emotionally reassuring. Listeners can imagine candlelight flickering over carefully carved marble, the distant sound of stringed instruments, and the soft conversations of citizens who, for the first time in generations, felt secure under the watchful guidance of their leaders. Governance during the Pax Romana was subtle but effective. Augustus and his successors understood that true power is quiet, wielded through consistency and fairness rather than force. Provincial governors ensured that laws were enforced gently, while local councils maintained daily life with minimal intrusion. The emperor's presence was felt more through stability and prosperity than through military intimidation. This calm authority reassures the listener that peace is not fragile. It is cultivated, nurtured, and maintained patiently over time. The military, too, contributed to this serene world. Soldiers no longer marched constantly in pursuit of conquest. Instead, they patrolled borders with measured care, building roads, bridges, and fortifications that protected without aggression. Their presence was a quiet promise, a steady reassurance that the empire's edges were secure. The listener can picture watchful eyes scanning distant hills, but with no sense of alarm, only quiet vigilance. This protective calm allows the empire to flourish internally, letting cities glow with life while soldiers serve as invisible guardians. Cultural exchange became a gentle breeze across the empire. Ideas, languages, and customs flowed quietly along trade routes, connecting distant peoples in ways that felt natural rather than forced. Roman law, Latin language, and administrative practices blended slowly with local traditions, producing a rich, diverse tapestry of human experience. A listener drifting toward sleep can imagine markets filled with exotic spices, languages mingling like soft music, and shared rituals forming the invisible threads of an enduring civilization. This is the subtle beauty of peace. It nurtures connection and growth without clamor. Even natural landscapes seem to echo this serenity. The rolling hills of Italy, the sun-dappled plains of Gaul, and the lush Nile Delta carried a quiet majesty under calm skies. Fields produced steady harvests, rivers flowed predictably, and forests provided a gentle backdrop to human activity. For the audience, these images evoke a sense of timelessness and continuity, allowing the mind to wander along sunlit roads, past tranquil towns, and into the reassuring expanse of the empire. The listener feels as though they are floating through history, absorbing the rhythm of life under peaceful governance. This period of gentle peace also encouraged introspection and reflection. Citizens could contemplate their lives without fear of sudden upheaval. Philosophers wrote quietly, offering wisdom to those who sought it. Families passed down stories in the warmth of their homes. Life, though still demanding, carried a rhythm that was predictable and comforting. Late-night listeners feel themselves drawn into this calm, internalizing both the quiet stability of the empire and the lessons it imparts about patience, foresight, and endurance. The Pax Romana reminds us that history is not always defined by dramatic battles or loud proclamations. Sometimes, it is measured in the subtle flow of daily life, the calm management of society, and the quiet assurance that the world continues to turn steadily. Roads, trade, and culture intertwine to create a living, breathing civilization that thrives not through fear, but through gentle consistency. For the audience seeking comfort, curiosity, and engagement, this era offers the perfect blend of relaxation and reflection, a soothing story to drift alongside as night deepens. By the end of this section, the listener has traveled through centuries of calm, feeling the pulse of an empire that finally learned the art of balance. Rome's power is present but not oppressive. Its influence reaches far and wide yet moves with quiet grace. The mind can rest, absorbing the slow, intricate harmony of the world, ready to continue the journey through history while gradually succumbing to sleep. As the sun dips low over Rome, its soft, golden light touches the terracotta rooftops and marble streets, casting gentle shadows that stretch lazily into the evening. The city, heart of a sprawling empire, is alive yet calm, moving with a rhythm that is both steady and reassuring. In the quiet corners of narrow lanes, merchants carefully close their stalls, arranging the last of the olives, figs, and woven fabrics before retreating home. The soft clatter of wooden carts along cobblestones blends with the distant laughter of children playing near fountains, a gentle reminder that life in the empire flows quietly, like a river bending through centuries. Markets in the empire are both vibrant and composed. Here, traders from distant provinces display their goods, fragrant spices from the east, fine textiles from Gaul, pottery from Hispania, each item a testament to Rome's subtle reach and the slow weaving together of cultures. Conversations meander calmly in Latin or in local dialects, the voices rising and falling like a soft lullaby. Buyers exchange coins and pleasantries, the clinking metallic notes adding to the ambient hum of daily life. For the listener, it's easy to imagine wandering these streets, absorbing the gentle colors, textures, and scents without the urgency of modern life intruding. Public baths, a hallmark of Roman culture, exude a soothing, communal energy. Citizens move through warm steam and softly lapping pools, their footsteps echoing faintly against polished marble. Here, conversations drift gently, philosophical debates and quiet laughter sharing space with a calming splash of water. Muscles relax, tensions dissolve, and the day's worries seem to float away. As a listener imagines this serene environment, the mind can almost feel the gentle warmth of the water, the mingling sense of oils and herbs, and the satisfying calm of shared human connection. The festivals of Rome, though grand in scale, maintain a graceful rhythm. Temples and forums glow under torchlight, the scent of incense and roasted foods carrying softly through the streets. Citizens participate in processions and offerings with an almost hypnotic flow, rituals that are both meaningful and meditative. Children weave between adults, collecting petals or tossing coins, their small movements adding a subtle, playful energy. To a listener lying in bed, these scenes unfold like a slow, immersive painting, allowing imagination to wander without pressure or haste. Daily life within homes mirrors this serene rhythm. Families gather for evening meals, breaking bread with quiet conversation. The clatter of plates and soft voices create a comforting domestic symphony. Parents recount stories of ancestors, weaving myths with gentle moral lessons, while children listen, eyes wide with wonder yet relaxed in the secure embrace of home. Servants move unobtrusively, tending lamps or fetching water, ensuring life flows smoothly. Through these domestic details, the empire feels intimate, familiar, and reassuring despite its vast scale. Work in the empire follows a subtle cadence. Artisans carve, mold, and paint with care, their focused movements producing beauty over time rather than haste. Farmers tend fields in distant provinces, the sun warming their shoulders as they guide oxen along furrows. Builders raise structures with measured precision, stone by stone, ensuring durability and quiet elegance. Each action, though small in isolation, contributes to the harmonious function of the empire, a gentle reminder that civilization is built not only by great leaders, but also by the rhythm of everyday life. The streets of Rome itself are alive with quiet choreography. Citizens traverse forums discussing matters of trade, religion, or philosophy. Actors rehearse lines for small theatrical performances, their voices rising and falling in controlled cadence. The scent of bread baking, oil burning, and herbs simmering fills the air, grounding the listener in sensory detail. Even the movement of animals, the soft steps of horses, the low murmur of livestock, blends seamlessly into the city's gentle soundscape. Imagining this, the audience can stroll alongside invisible shadows, absorbing the layered life of the empire without urgency or distraction. Religious practices maintain a calm, spiritual presence. Temples stand as serene oases, priests performing rituals in measured sequences, incense curling in the warm air. Citizens offer prayers quietly, lighting lamps and placing small offerings, the gentle repetition of these acts creating a comforting rhythm. For listeners, this spiritual undercurrent enhances the sense of continuity and safety, a soft reassurance that amidst the vastness of Rome, quiet devotion endures. Life moves forward here with purpose but never in haste, a lesson in balance and stability. Even leisure is a study in gentle living. Music floats from lyres and flutes, blending with soft laughter in courtyards. Gardens provide shaded retreats, fountains gurgling quietly as citizens stroll between flowering paths. The empire's intellectual life thrives in these calm settings. Philosophers, poets, and scholars discuss ideas in measured tones, their thoughts drifting as naturally as clouds across the sky. The audience can drift along with them, absorbing the rhythm of reflection and creativity as easily as the sound of a soft breeze. The evening itself carries a particular magic. As the sun fades fully behind the hills, the city lights flicker on, illuminating streets and plazas with warm glows. Smoke rises gently from hearths, mingling with the distant scent of pine and river water. Citizens retreat indoors, but the hum of life continues softly, a servant closing a shutter, a dog settling at a doorstep, the faint echo of footsteps on distant steps. For a late-night listener, this scene encourages a sense of safety and wonder, an intimate connection with a world both ancient and enduring. By the time darkness blankets the city, life in the empire has not paused but softened. Markets are quiet, baths emptied, festivals concluded, and homes glowing softly with candlelight. The gentle rhythm of daily existence, the soft movements of people, the calming hum of streets, and the subtle heartbeat of a sprawling civilization, lulls the audience into a state of reflection and ease. Listeners feel as if they are walking through the heart of Rome itself, experiencing life without pressure, enveloped in the steady pulse of history. In this tranquil immersion, the empire becomes more than walls and roads. It becomes a living, breathing organism. Citizens, families, workers, and travelers all contribute to a slow, enduring rhythm that fills the mind with calm curiosity. Each detail, a merchant's smile, the laughter of children, the warmth of a bath, the glow of candlelight, builds a tapestry of life that invites the audience to rest, dream, and drift gently through the story of an empire in peaceful motion. Here, the listener has walked through daily life, feeling its quiet majesty, ready to drift further into history's embrace as sleep quietly arrives. The first light of dawn spreads over the hills of the empire, touching distant frontiers where the scent of earth and river drifts softly on the wind. In Rome, the city's quiet pulse carries the whispers of a ruler whose ambition is vast but measured, whose mind considers the horizons far beyond the familiar streets and temples. Trajan, though a man of action, moves within history with a sense of calm foresight, shaping the empire not with frantic energy but with careful, deliberate steps. His campaigns are planned thoughtfully, his roads and fortresses laid with patient precision, each stone echoing a vision of steady growth. In the northern provinces, the legions march quietly through forests and valleys, their movements disciplined yet unhurried. These are not chaotic battles but measured advances, learning the terrain, observing rivers, and building trust with some local communities while asserting authority with others. The rhythmic sound of sandals on soft earth, the distant clatter of supply wagons, and the murmur of soldiers, voices create a gentle cadence that carries the listener along. Through this, the empire stretches its reach without urgency, slowly knitting distant lands into a cohesive whole, each new settlement a thread in Rome's expanding tapestry. Trajan's vision includes not only conquest, but the integration of diverse peoples. Along quiet roads, traders, artisans, and families move between towns and outposts, carrying foods, fabrics, and customs from one province to another. The empire grows not only through legions, but through these subtle human currents, farmers bringing grains, potters exchanging wares, and scholars sharing knowledge. For the listener, this expansion feels calm, almost organic, like a tree gradually extending its branches into the sky. Rome's strength emerges less from force alone and more from this quiet weaving of cultures and people. Even the military campaigns, remarkable though they are narrated as gentle odysseys rather than explosive events. Trajan's conquest of Dacia, for instance, is recounted as a series of careful maneuvers, clever engineering of bridges and fortifications, and strategic patience rather than dramatic clashes. Soldiers endure long marches and rugged terrain, yet the focus is on endurance, adaptation, and the slow accumulation of experience. In this depiction, the audience feels the satisfaction of steady progress, the quiet triumph of skill, and the human stories behind grand historical achievements. The construction projects initiated under Trajan further illustrate this serene power. Roads wind through hills and valleys, aqueducts carry water in elegant arcs, and bridges span rivers with graceful arches. These structures are more than utility. They are symbols of thoughtfulness, connecting distant parts of the empire, allowing ideas, goods, and people to move at a measured pace. Markets spring up along these roads where small communities flourish quietly, benefiting from the slow, steady hand of governance. Every stone, every path, and every town adds to the calm rhythm of imperial life. Back in Rome, Trajan's presence is felt in more subdued ways. Senate meetings and administrative councils proceed with careful deliberation, where decisions are weighed thoughtfully rather than rushed. Citizens notice the subtle expansion of wealth, the increased flow of goods, and the soft glow of cultural achievements like temples, forums, and libraries. Artisans and architects contribute their skills to projects that will endure for generations, embedding beauty and utility into the fabric of the empire. For late-night listeners, this scene paints a world where growth is both grand and intimate, monumental yet approachable. Education and culture flourish alongside military and architectural expansion. Scholars and philosophers travel from province to province, spreading ideas and recording the wisdom of the past. Libraries quietly gather texts from across the known world, preserving knowledge like a gentle flame in the night. Music, poetry, and storytelling provide soft illumination, allowing the people of Rome to feel connected despite vast distances. Trajan's reign is thus remembered not only for territorial expansion, but for the patient cultivation of a civilized world, where intellect, art, and governance advance in measured harmony. Even the challenges faced during expansion are treated with calm reflection. Conflicts with rebellious tribes, harsh winters in distant lands, and the logistics of maintaining distant legions are all explained as problems solved through foresight, negotiation, and slow adaptation. Soldiers and administrators alike learn from each experience, their lessons quietly shaping the empire's ability to endure. Listeners are invited to imagine the weight of responsibility carried with calm determination, understanding that great achievements are often the result of patient, persistent effort rather than sudden action. As evening falls across the vast provinces, the sun touches the rivers, forests, and hills Trajan has brought under Rome's careful influence. Camps are settled, roads are quiet, and trade continues at a measured pace. Across cities and towns, the pulse of daily life resumes its steady rhythm. Markets hum softly, baths release warm steam into calm courtyards, and families gather to share meals and stories. The empire feels alive, not through frenzy or spectacle, but through the continuity of human effort and the quiet realization of vision. In this serene portrayal, Trajan's expansion becomes more than conquest. It becomes a meditation on persistence, foresight, and the subtle accumulation of influence. The listener drifts along the gentle waves of history, feeling the empire grow without urgency, absorbing lessons in patience and human resilience. Every road, legion, and settlement contributes to a slow-moving harmony, a quiet testament to the possibilities of careful leadership. By the time night blankets the lands, the listener can almost sense the empire's heartbeat, steady, enduring, and gently expanding under the calm guidance of one of Rome's greatest emperors. As dawn filters through the misty hills of distant provinces, the empire seems to breathe gently under Hadrian's watchful eye. Unlike previous rulers who measured greatness by expansion, Hadrian's vision is of balance, of measured strength, and of understanding where the edge of power lies. He walks quietly through Rome's bustling streets, observing the city's rhythm, the flow of people, and the whispers of ideas that stretch from forum to forum. Yet his thoughts are already far away, toward the boundaries where the empire meets the unknown, contemplating the delicate line between influence and overreach. The listener drifts northward with him, through forests and along river valleys, as Hadrian inspects distant lands. He sees not just the strategic value of territory, but the human stories that inhabit it. Villages, markets, and scattered farms illustrate that borders are not merely lines on a map, but living, breathing spaces where culture, trade, and identity mingle. Through calm narration, one can sense the emperor's understanding. A strong empire is not only about the lands it claims, but also about the people it protects and connects. Hadrian's most famous creation, the wall stretching across northern Britain, appears in the imagination like a gentle ridge following the hills and forests. It is not a weapon of chaos, but a thoughtful barrier, a measured mark to define limits and create security. Along the wall, soldiers patrol at a quiet pace, watchtowers rise gently against the horizon, and small forts dot the landscape like peaceful sentinels. The listener can almost feel the crisp northern air, the distant cries of wildlife, and the soft clatter of boots on stone, all blending into a calm meditation on purpose and responsibility. Traveling back to the Mediterranean provinces, Hadrian's reforms are equally soft but profound. Roads are repaired with care, aqueducts renewed, and cities reshaped to foster cohesion. The movement of goods, ideas, and people follows a gentle rhythm, ensuring that even at the empire's edges, life flows smoothly. Traders, artisans, and travelers experience a subtle harmony. Every action feels connected to a broader vision. Here, expansion gives way to consolidation, and the empire learns the quiet strength of stability rather than conquest. In Rome, Hadrian's presence is serene but palpable. Meetings with governors and senators proceed with calm deliberation, emphasizing observation, dialogue, and long-term planning. The emperor's interest in culture, architecture, and philosophy permeates every decision, creating a sense that governance itself can be a reflective, measured art. For late-night listeners, these images evoke not the drama of palace intrigue, but the quiet mastery of someone who shapes history with subtle, enduring gestures. Even the military is guided by this philosophy. Campaigns are carefully considered, rarely rushed. Soldiers stationed on the frontiers know their purpose clearly but move without panic or frenzy. Training, fortification, and diplomacy unfold as parts of a gentle rhythm, illustrating that the strength of Rome lies not only in its legions, but in the thoughtful integration of strategy and human experience. Conflict is seen through the lens of preparation, adaptation, and measured response. The provinces themselves thrive under Hadrian's watch. Cities host markets where cultures intermingle, festivals mark the changing seasons, and artisans build with care, preserving the essence of local traditions while reinforcing the unity of the empire. Knowledge flows along the roads he has rebuilt. Scholars travel quietly, preserving wisdom for generations. From a late-night listener's perspective, the empire feels alive not as a realm of ceaseless conquest, but as a living network of people, connected and protected, guided by a calm hand. As evening approaches, Hadrian's gaze stretches to the horizon, where forests fade into hills and rivers bend gently toward the sea. The wall in Britain stands as a quiet sentinel, cities hum with life, and the roads pulse with the subtle energy of trade and travel. The empire's borders are no longer lines to cross aggressively, but spaces to safeguard, each one infused with purpose and forethought. Through this calm narration, listeners absorb a lesson. Greatness is sometimes in restraint, in knowing where to stop, and in building durable peace. Under Hadrian, Rome learns that security and culture can coexist. The empire's strength is no longer measured solely by the lands it claims, but by the stability, unity, and flourishing of the people within. For the listener, this is a journey through a world where vigilance and peace are entwined, where borders serve as quiet guardians rather than constant flashpoints, and where an empire grows gracefully by understanding its own limits. By the nightfall of this imagined day, the provinces rest quietly, the stars reflect over Hadrian's fortresses, and the soft glow of lamps illuminates towns and cities. Hadrian's reign feels like a gentle tide, shaping the edges of the empire with thoughtfulness and care. In this meditative narration, one can feel Rome's pulse, steady, resilient, and thoughtfully expansive, offering a calm rhythm that lulls the mind while painting the quiet grandeur of imperial responsibility. Morning light filters softly across the marble columns of Rome, as if inviting the listener to pause and breathe deeply. Marcus Aurelius walks these streets, a figure of calm reflection in a world often defined by noise and ambition. Unlike predecessors who measured power by conquests or borders, he seeks mastery of the inner world, showing that leadership extends beyond strategy into the realm of thought and virtue. His meditations unfold gently, as if whispered to the night, offering lessons in resilience, patience, and quiet understanding. The empire stretches before him like a vast living map, yet Marcus is not overwhelmed by its size. He observes soldiers drilling, merchants trading, and citizens moving with purpose. Each moment is a study in harmony, a reminder that the human experience is intertwined with the stability of the state. The listener is carried softly along the streets and forums, absorbing not only the sights and sounds, but the subtle philosophy that underpins them. That wisdom guides action more enduringly than force. Campaigns on distant frontiers are calm, but purposeful under Marcus's watch. The Danube and other northern borders witness legions maintaining peace with quiet diligence. Soldiers, while alert, move with measured care, learning from the terrain and the people they encounter. Conflict is treated not as spectacle but as responsibility, a challenge met with thoughtfulness rather than bravado. The listener can almost feel the rhythm of daily patrols, the soft murmur of strategy, and the reflective presence of a ruler who seeks harmony even in distant lands. Back in the heart of Rome, Marcus Aurelius's governance reflects the same steady philosophy. Meetings with advisors and senators unfold as quiet dialogues, emphasizing understanding, reason, and the long-term well-being of citizens. Cultural and civic projects receive thoughtful attention, from the restoration of temples to the nurturing of arts and literature. For late-night listeners, these depictions create a soft, immersive rhythm, a city alive with purpose, yet guided by contemplative calm rather than frantic urgency. Marcus's personal meditations become a gentle thread throughout the empire's pulse. His reflections on duty, mortality, and the fleeting nature of life echo through palaces, forums, and quiet gardens. Citizens, soldiers, and scholars unknowingly participate in this reflective energy, feeling the subtle influence of a leader whose strength lies in thought as much as in action. The narrative invites listeners to absorb this serenity, connecting the philosophy of a single mind with the well-being of millions. Even challenges, the plague, frontier unrest, and administrative strain, are presented as lessons in endurance and thoughtful response. Marcus teaches through his example that wisdom is not the absence of difficulty, but the capacity to navigate it with clarity and calm. Late-night listeners feel a gentle reassurance that even when the world presents obstacles, reflection and measured action can maintain balance and dignity across an empire. Throughout the provinces, daily life continues in quiet rhythm. Markets hum, artisans work, and families gather, echoing the calm philosophy of leadership. Roads carry goods, ideas, and letters. Temples and libraries provide spaces for reflection and learning. The empire thrives not through frantic expansion, but through continuity, contemplation, and the patient cultivation of culture. Listeners drift along these currents, sensing an empire sustained by thought as much as by steel. As dusk falls, the western sky turns amber. The Danube's waters reflect the last light, and Hadrian's walls and Trajan's roads glimmer softly in memory. Marcus Aurelius, walking through the gardens of his residence, contemplates the delicate balance of human ambition and ethical responsibility. The empire rests in quiet harmony, its strength measured not by spectacle but by resilience, wisdom, and the enduring influence of mindful leadership. The listener is enveloped in this calm panorama, a gentle meditation on the power of thought guiding history. In this final scene, the empire appears both vast and intimate, sustained by leaders who blend action with reflection. Marcus Aurelius exemplifies a Rome that has learned patience, endurance, and the quiet art of guiding millions with thoughtfulness. The narrative closes softly, leaving the listener with a sense of calm achievement, the slow pulse of history echoing into the night, and the enduring lesson that wisdom is the quietest, most powerful force of all. The sun rises over a restless empire, but its light falls on lands roiling with uncertainty. Rome, once serene and seemingly eternal, enters a century marked by subtle tremors that ripple quietly through cities and provinces alike. These years are not defined by loud collapse alone, but by a slow, pervasive sense of instability. Emperors rise and fall like shifting tides, some barely seen before vanishing into history, their names whispering through corridors of power. The listener drifts gently along with the narrative, absorbing the quiet pattern of change as if watching the ocean's ebb and flow. In the provinces, distant governors manage territories while whispers of rebellion and foreign threats float through towns and countryside. Trade moves irregularly along once predictable roads, and citizens adjust their routines with soft vigilance. There is no sudden crash but a gradual sense of unpredictability, the heartbeat of an empire in flux. Late-night listeners can imagine market stalls opening under muted skies, banners swaying gently in the wind, and distant roads where travelers tread cautiously, sensing the subtle pulse of uncertainty. Military life mirrors this quiet tension. Legions stationed at the edges of the empire maintain order while grappling with fragmented authority and scattered resources. Soldiers march with steady discipline, yet the horizon seems to shift beneath them. As new enemies arise, internal disputes flare and succession crises linger. The listener can almost hear the muted thrum of hooves on dusty roads and the soft rustle of banners in camp, illustrating that survival in this century is measured in patience and endurance rather than dramatic victory. Amid this subtle turmoil, the empire faces economic strain. Cities still hum with activity, but trade networks fluctuate. Tax collection becomes a gentle negotiation rather than a simple system. Families in the provinces experience these quiet shifts, adapting with small acts of resilience. Artisans continue to work, merchants adjust routes, and communities seek stability in shared routines. The listener is carried along these pathways, sensing that Rome's endurance is woven through countless minor acts of persistence rather than grand gestures. Natural events also play a role in this century's quiet storms. Harsh winters, unusual floods, and epidemics ripple softly across the landscape. Farmers, accustomed to seasonal rhythms, learn again how to read the sky and soil, adjusting planting and harvest. Their labor, repetitive yet vital, sustains the empire's fragile balance. Listeners can imagine the smell of damp earth, the subtle chill in the morning air, and the gentle toil of hands shaping food and resources. Reminders that history often hinges on ordinary lives quietly persevering. Within the city of Rome, the political scene reflects the same gentle turbulence. Emperors struggle to assert authority, Senate debates drift into muted disagreements, and ambitious figures rise with calm calculation. Unlike the sudden bursts of conquest remembered from centuries past, this era is marked by careful maneuvering, soft victories, and quiet missteps. Late-night listeners are invited to witness this human rhythm, a world in which leadership requires constant attention, patience, and subtle adaptation. Religion and culture offer a soft anchor. Temples continue to glow with lamp light, rituals follow gentle cadence, and philosophical schools debate in measured tones. These spaces of reflection provide stability, reminding citizens and listeners alike that even when political and military winds shift, the rhythm of daily life and human belief remains a grounding force. One can almost hear the murmured chants, soft footsteps in marble halls, and the flutter of scrolls turning in the quiet, emphasizing continuity amidst uncertainty. As decades accumulate, the empire is tested in myriad ways. Barbarians at the edges, internal usurpers, and economic fluctuations blend into a long, quiet trial. Rome's pulse continues, not with the loud drum of conquest, but with steady perseverance. The narrative allows listeners to drift through time, witnessing the resilience embedded in cities, roads, and communities. Every provincial town, frontier camp, and Roman street hums with life, soft yet unyielding. By the close of this imagined century, the empire appears weathered but enduring. The storms have left marks, some cracks in walls, some new borders, some lessons in governance, but the pulse remains steady. Listeners, lulled by this meditation on gradual challenge and endurance, feel the subtle power of Rome not as an unshakable giant, but as a living, adaptive entity. It survives through quiet vigilance, the enduring work of citizens and soldiers alike, and the slow, soft shaping hand of history. Rome's story in these years reminds us that crisis is often subtle, cumulative, and slow-moving. The century's storms are not dramatic clashes alone, but a series of gentle, persistent pressures, testing the character of a civilization. As the night deepens, the empire's resilience becomes a soothing lesson. Even under long periods of uncertainty, life continues, adaptation prevails, and the quiet strength of preparation, patience, and endurance ensures that Rome will rise again. The horizon glows faintly with morning light, and the empire, still breathing from decades of slow crisis, finds a new rhythm under Aurelian. His arrival is not heralded by grand proclamations, but by quiet, methodical action. Provinces once slipping from central control now feel the subtle pull of order. Roads are repaired, garrisons reinforced, and governors reminded of their duties. Listeners drift through this restoration, sensing that Rome's strength is measured not by thunderous victories alone, but by steady, disciplined attention to detail. Aurelian's campaigns are narrated like long, deliberate journeys. Soldiers march with steady precision across provinces, securing borders and reclaiming lands. Their presence is firm yet calm, a reassurance to citizens and a subtle signal to foes. Unlike dramatic cinematic clashes, the emphasis is on organization, logistics, and the quiet impact of disciplined force. The listener can almost hear the gentle cadence of marching boots, the measured clink of armor, and the faint rustle of banners, all composing a rhythmic meditation on restoration. In Rome itself, citizens notice changes with soft observation. Markets flow more smoothly, taxes stabilize, and communications along roads become reliable once again. Artisans and merchants benefit from renewed infrastructure, while governors operate with clearer directives. The narrative carries the listener through these subtle shifts, illustrating how a vast empire can be mended gradually through steady governance rather than sudden triumphs. Each act of restoration, though small in isolation, collectively strengthens the pulse of the state. Religious and cultural unity is also nurtured under Aurelian. Temples are maintained, festivals observed, and communities encouraged to reconnect with shared traditions. These moments, gentle yet powerful, act as glue, binding the empire together while reinforcing a sense of continuity and stability. For the listener, this evokes images of softly lit temples, quiet ceremonies, and people moving in harmony with the rhythms of civic life, all under the watchful care of an emperor attuned to subtle cohesion. Borders, long tested by external threats, become a central focus. Aurelian fortifies positions against northern and eastern foes, not through reckless expansion, but through careful, measured placement. Soldiers patrol with purpose, and frontier towns are guided into a quiet network of defense. Listeners can imagine distant rivers, fortified hills, and quiet camps where discipline and foresight maintain peace. The narrative emphasizes that enduring power is cultivated through preparation and careful oversight rather than raw aggression alone. Through quiet diplomacy, Aurelian consolidates loyalty among formerly rebellious provinces. Governors are engaged gently, local elites consulted with patience, and treaties honored with attention to detail. Trade routes, once disrupted, begin flowing again, carrying goods, ideas, and information with soft, steady energy. Late-night listeners absorb the sense of an empire being repaired not by spectacle, but by thoughtful, persistent effort, appreciating the depth of work that underpins stability. Even crises, such as uprisings or natural challenges, are addressed with calm efficiency. Rather than dramatizing these events, the narration presents them as tests of organization, judgment, and human resilience. Soldiers, administrators, and citizens participate in the quiet choreography of problem-solving, highlighting Rome's adaptability. The listener senses the rhythm of recovery, the steady heartbeat of order returning to areas once fractured by chaos. By evening, Aurelian surveys the lands he has helped stabilize. Cities glow softly under lamplight, roads hum with commerce, and the frontier fortresses stand as silent witnesses to careful leadership. The empire, though scarred by decades of crisis, breathes with renewed confidence. For listeners, this evokes a soothing lesson that repair and resilience are achievable through steady, deliberate action, and that even vast, complex systems can regain equilibrium when guided with focus and patience. The narrative closes with a reflection on Rome's quiet strength. Aurelian's reign may not resonate like dramatic conquests in memory, but its impact is profound. Through measured campaigns, meticulous governance, and the cultivation of cultural unity, he restores the empire's pulse. Late-night listeners, absorbed in this calming rhythm, feel both curiosity and reassurance that Rome can endure, adapt, and thrive even after decades of subtle storms, because patient wisdom and consistent action shape history in ways both visible and unseen. The sun rises gently over Rome as Diocletian ascends to power, carrying with him a vision of stability after decades of turmoil. Unlike predecessors who relied solely on military might or personal authority, Diocletian seeks to reorder the empire with thoughtful precision. The listener drifts through this transformation, observing how reforms quietly ripple through administration, military organization, and provincial life. Roads, borders, and bureaucracies are aligned with careful attention, as if the empire itself exhales in relief at the presence of a guiding hand. Diocletian divides the empire into manageable sections, creating a system that blends central authority with local governance. Governors receive clear duties, armies coordinate along predictable patterns, and communication flows steadily along the reconstructed road networks. For late-night listeners, the imagery is immersive yet calm. Roads stretching under the morning sun, fortresses standing like silent sentinels, and towns awakening with the reassurance of structured oversight. Military strategy under Diocletian is deliberate rather than flashy. Legions are stationed strategically along frontiers, patrolling with measured cadence. Conflicts are anticipated, and supply lines maintained with meticulous care. The narrative focuses on rhythm and planning, offering the listener a sense of quiet order rather than chaotic battle. Soldiers, townsfolk, and administrators function together in a calm choreography, illustrating that discipline and foresight underpin a stable empire. Economic reform mirrors this soft restructuring. Taxation becomes predictable, markets flow more reliably, and provincial administration is streamlined. Artisans, merchants, and farmers participate in an orderly economy, their labor connecting provinces in a gentle network of interdependence. The listener is guided through a world where stability encourages growth, curiosity, and daily life's quiet beauty, all under the subtle guidance of a reforming ruler. Cultural cohesion is nurtured through ceremonies, festivals, and religious observances. Temples glow softly with lamplight, philosophers debate quietly, and citizens experience a renewed rhythm of civic life. These cultural threads, carefully maintained, provide a gentle anchor amidst decades of upheaval. For the listener, this evokes calm evenings in provincial towns and the reassuring continuity of shared traditions. By evening, Diocletian's reforms have permeated the empire. Roads hum with commerce, fortresses guard borders unobtrusively, and towns reflect the quiet structure of governance. The narrative emphasizes that stability is not achieved through spectacle alone, but through persistent, careful, and thoughtful organization. Listeners feel the calm power of an empire reordered not by chance but by deliberate design. The story concludes with reflection. Diocletian's reign marks a turning point where chaos recedes, and Rome learns the rhythm of sustained, systemic order. The empire, vast and complex, now functions with subtle predictability. Late-night listeners absorb both the logic and serenity of this restructuring, understanding that great civilizations endure not only through conquest, but through foresight, planning, and the patient orchestration of human activity. Rome's pulse continues, steady and resilient, a soft reminder that history is shaped by quiet mastery as much as dramatic events. The first light of morning spreads gently across the empire as Constantine rises to power, bringing with him a vision that will quietly reshape Rome's destiny. Unlike the thunderous campaigns of past rulers, his approach is measured, deliberate, and transformative in subtle ways. The listener drifts into a world where politics, faith, and innovation converge, feeling the soft undercurrent of change moving through cities and provinces alike. Roads, rivers, and hilltops carry the quiet weight of expectation as Constantine's presence becomes a stabilizing force in an empire long tested by turbulence. At the heart of his reign lies the embrace of a new faith. Christianity, once whispered in the shadows of Rome's streets and alleys, now emerges with quiet authority. Temples are complemented by churches. Rituals shift from old gods to new, yet the transition is gentle, marked by soft negotiation and patient persuasion. The narrative flows like a calm river, guiding listeners through the subtle ways belief transforms daily life. Markets open with prayers for protection, families discuss spiritual matters at home, and citizens experience both curiosity and reassurance in a changing cultural landscape. Constantine also reforms the political and military structures with careful attention. Emperors before him often relied on dramatic action or sudden decisions, but he blends foresight with strategy. Provinces are reassessed, garrisons aligned, and administrative offices reorganized. Soldiers march along quiet roads, townspeople observe the rhythm of governance, and a soft sense of order spreads through once fractured regions. Listeners can almost hear the measured cadence of official proclamations, the distant clatter of wheels on stone roads, and the hum of civic life as stability seeps in. His vision extends to architecture and urban planning. Cities grow with subtle grandeur. Roads are straightened, bridges reinforced, and monuments rise, not as ostentation but as markers of permanence and care. Constantinople begins to take shape in the imagination of listeners as a city that blends function with calm beauty. Each structure, each plaza, feels like a gentle reminder of human ingenuity quietly supporting imperial power, inspiring reflection and admiration without overwhelming drama. Economic reform accompanies political and spiritual shifts. Trade stabilizes along the Mediterranean, markets in provinces hum with reliable activity, and wealth circulates with renewed predictability. Farmers, artisans, and merchants find their routines supported by careful policy and infrastructure. For late-night listeners, this evokes the scent of grain, the soft rhythm of artisans at work, and the quiet glow of lanterns along bustling streets, painting a vivid yet serene portrait of an empire regaining equilibrium. Constantine's diplomatic approach is equally deliberate. Alliances are nurtured through correspondence and negotiation rather than sudden conquest. Ambassadors move with subtle influence, provincial governors are guided through counsel, and the empire's edges experience a gentle return to coherence. Listeners drift along these routes, imagining caravans and couriers navigating the empire with calm purpose, ensuring that distant lands remain connected to the central vision. Even the personal life of the emperor is portrayed with measured intimacy. Constantine's decisions, contemplations, and strategies are shared as quiet reflections, offering insight into the human side of history. Listeners are invited to imagine his study at dusk, the flicker of candlelight across maps and scrolls, and the soft murmur of advisors discussing policies with restraint. This approach maintains the gentle rhythm, ensuring curiosity without urgency and illustrating leadership as thoughtful rather than reckless. As evening falls, the empire breathes under Constantine's influence. Citizens feel subtle changes, from new religious freedoms to improved administration, while distant provinces experience the quiet return of stability. The narrative concludes by reflecting on the calm yet profound transformation brought by one man's vision. Late-night listeners absorb both curiosity and reassurance. That history often turns on quiet determination, foresight, and the careful harmonization of faith, politics, and culture. Rome under Constantine finds a new dawn, not in loud triumphs, but in the steady glow of possibility. A soft morning haze drifts over the Bosporus, and the listener is transported to the marshlands, hills, and coastline where Constantinople begins to emerge. Unlike Rome's bustling chaos, this city grows with deliberate calm. Constantine's vision is not merely architectural, it is spiritual, political, and symbolic. Roads, marketplaces, and public spaces develop slowly yet purposefully, guided by planning that balances function with quiet grandeur. The narration invites listeners to imagine a city awakening, the rhythm of life unfolding in harmony with imperial intent. The strategic location is highlighted gently: waters that meet, bridges that connect, and hills that watch over trade routes. Constantinople becomes a city of observation and control, yet also one of reflection. Citizens and soldiers alike adjust to a new urban pulse. Markets open under soft sunlight, scholars wander among libraries, and the hum of civic life suggests an empire quietly shifting its center of gravity. Listeners feel the intrigue of growth without confrontation, sensing the patience and vision required to establish a lasting capital. Religious life forms a central thread. Churches rise alongside old temples, festivals blend old and new, and citizens explore faith in its evolving forms. Constantine's careful promotion of Christianity integrates subtly into daily routines. Listeners imagine priests walking among neighborhoods, gentle chanting in basilicas, and families lighting lamps while pondering new teachings. These details transform the city into a living, breathing organism where belief, commerce, and governance coexist in a soothing rhythm. Trade and infrastructure flow with quiet sophistication. Roads lead to distant provinces, aqueducts carry water steadily into neighborhoods, and fortified walls, though imposing, emit a sense of protective calm rather than aggressive threat. Artisans, farmers, and traders participate in this subtle symphony, each movement contributing to the city's stability. For listeners, this evokes a serene visualization. Lantern-lit streets, barges gliding along rivers, and the faint sound of voices in distant forums, all orchestrating life in measured harmony. Education, philosophy, and culture flourish alongside administration. Schools, libraries, and forums become centers of calm exploration. Debates and discussions unfold in hushed tones, offering intellectual stimulation without tension. The narrative encourages listeners to envision scholars copying manuscripts, poets reciting quietly, and civic leaders contemplating policy, reinforcing the impression of an empire cultivating both mind and body through deliberate care. Security and governance are applied with subtle consistency. Guards patrol walls with silent precision, magistrates resolve disputes with gentle authority, and provincial leaders follow structured guidance. Unlike earlier eras of reactive power, Constantinople embodies foresight. Planning reduces friction, anticipation ensures order, and the city hums with controlled energy. Listeners feel reassurance as the empire's heart functions smoothly, almost invisibly, while maintaining strength and cohesion. Even the environment is gently integrated into the city's growth. Hills, harbors, and rivers are respected in urban planning. Citizens stroll along shaded quays, fishers cast nets in calm waters, and the wind carries soft echoes of waves and distant bells. The narration ensures that listeners drift into this space as if exploring it themselves, absorbing the quiet rhythm of a city designed to last for centuries. By evening, Constantinople glows under lanterns and moonlight. The walls and towers, streets and marketplaces all exude a quiet permanence. Listeners are left with the impression that this city, rising patiently from marshes and hills, will endure as a symbol of foresight, culture, and calm governance. Its story, narrated with gentle attention to detail, demonstrates that enduring power grows not from dramatic conquest alone, but from careful planning, subtle adaptation, and the quiet nurturing of human life. The horizon stretches across mountains and rivers, and Rome stands at a crossroads. The empire, vast and complex, has reached a size that whispers of necessary change. Diocletian's reforms had stabilized distant provinces, yet the sheer scale of administration calls for a more permanent adjustment. The listener is carried gently through the logic of splitting the empire, understanding that this is not abrupt fracture but a quiet evolution to preserve cohesion, order, and culture across miles and generations. The East and West, once united under a single rule, begin their separate yet interwoven paths. Constantinople grows as a vibrant center, while Rome continues its historical legacy. Citizens, governors, and military leaders adjust to the new balance with soft awareness rather than alarm. Roads carry messages carefully, fortresses mark boundaries quietly, and administration becomes a dance of coordination rather than confrontation. Listeners sense the rhythm of a bifurcated empire functioning like two hands moving in tandem, each guided by thoughtful design. Economically, the split is managed with subtle precision. Trade routes are maintained, markets in both halves remain connected, and supply chains are reorganized without visible upheaval. Provinces understand their new chains of command, and artisans, farmers, and merchants adapt to the soft, calculated reordering of governance. For the listener, this evokes gentle imagery, the glint of coins passing from hand to hand, merchants loading goods onto silent ships, and markets waking under morning light with predictable efficiency. Military strategy reflects this quiet recalibration. Legions are stationed to balance defense between East and West, patrols follow predictable routines, and frontier towns adjust to new oversight. Conflict, when it arises, is addressed with measured response, not sudden escalation. The narrative encourages listeners to imagine disciplined soldiers marching in soft formation, banners fluttering against dawn skies, and camps humming with quiet order, all preserving peace across vast distances. Cultural continuity is woven into the division. Temples, churches, and forums maintain familiar rituals, while artistic and intellectual centers adapt subtly to the new centers of authority. Education continues in both halves, and philosophical discourse thrives under calm observation. Listeners are guided through the serene rhythm of intellectual life, scribes copying texts by lamplight, philosophers walking under quiet colonnades, and citizens attending festivals that echo tradition while embracing subtle change. Political leadership in each half balances independence with coordination. Emperors understand their responsibilities, governors act under clear directives, and policies are harmonized where necessary. Listeners absorb the sense of calculated symmetry, two realms operating separately yet maintaining the soft pulse of a unified civilization. This quiet orchestration allows the empire to endure despite its immense size and complexity, providing both reassurance and fascination. By evening, the split feels natural rather than violent. Constantinople glows with purposeful calm, while Rome hums with historical weight. The empire, though divided, remains cohesive, resilient, and adaptive. Late-night listeners perceive the subtle genius of this arrangement. That longevity often depends on thoughtful division, careful oversight, and patient coordination rather than dramatic confrontation. The story closes with the quiet reflection that Rome's legacy endures, not only through conquest and spectacle, but through measured wisdom, foresight, and the patient orchestration of human society. A soft morning mist drifts over the Western Empire, and listeners are guided into a world where Rome, vast and ancient, feels both majestic and fragile. Unlike dramatic battlefield scenes, the narrative focuses on slow, persistent pressures that shape the empire's destiny. The northern frontiers hum with movement, tribes pressing gently yet insistently against borders, scouts reporting quietly from distant forests and hills. Each challenge is described with a calm cadence, allowing listeners to absorb the inevitability of change without tension, like a river quietly eroding a stone cliff over centuries. Economic strains flow silently through the provinces. Grain shipments falter, coins wear thin, and trade shifts subtly, creating ripples across towns and markets. Citizens notice the quiet tightening of resources. Artisans adjust their output, farmers brace for unpredictable seasons, and merchants calculate every voyage with care. For late-night listeners, this evokes the smell of damp granaries, the quiet murmur of townsfolk discussing daily needs, and the soft rhythm of life adapting to slow systemic stress. Meanwhile, political structures strain under increasing complexity. Governors manage provinces with distant oversight, military commanders follow shifting loyalties, and emperors attempt to balance diplomacy with defense. Yet decisions ripple slowly rather than dramatically. The narration emphasizes patterns and consequences. Every action, every policy, is a gentle nudge rather than a thunderclap, creating a tapestry of cause and effect that listeners can follow without being jolted from sleep. The borders themselves tell a story of persistence and pressure. From the Rhine to the Danube, tribes such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Franks move steadily, seeking opportunity, security, and settlement. The narration invites the listener to imagine scouts observing distant fires on the horizon, messengers riding along quiet roads, and the subtle tension of a world adjusting to shifting demographics. These movements are depicted as natural, slow forces of history rather than violent shocks. Internal dynamics add to the quiet strain. Social divisions, political corruption, and fatigue among citizens combine like a low hum beneath the surface. Daily life continues, yet small fractures appear in governance, loyalty, and cultural cohesion. Listeners perceive Rome not as collapsing in a dramatic explosion, but as slowly bending under invisible weights, a delicate structure adapting to centuries of accumulated change. Each village, town, and city participates in this soft rhythm, from quiet marketplaces to bustling roads under fading daylight. Even the military shows subtle shifts. Legions, once symbols of unshakable authority, adapt to recruitment shortages, stretched supply lines, and shifting allegiances. Soldiers follow routine marches through misty mornings, their training precise yet weary. Listeners are gently drawn into the rhythm of camps and patrols. The sound of hooves on soft ground, the occasional flapping of banners, and the hum of conversation that hints at both resilience and strain. Rome, vast and powerful, remains coherent, yet its foundations quietly tremble under persistent, multi-directional pressures. The section concludes by reflecting on the quiet inevitability of change. The empire endures, but the cumulative weight of border pressures, economic strain, and social shifts creates a landscape poised for transformation. Late-night viewers drift along this tapestry of subtle challenges, absorbing curiosity and reflection. How can such a monumental civilization adapt, survive, and yet feel the persistent pull of history's tide? Time flows softly through the final decades of the Western Empire, and the listener meets the last emperors as figures navigating history's gentle currents. Unlike stories of bold conquest, their reigns are described with measured calm, rulers making decisions in quiet corridors, negotiating treaties, and managing internal unrest. Listeners imagine palaces under candlelight, advisors speaking in subdued tones, and governors conveying reports with careful phrasing. The human dimension is foregrounded, creating intimacy without drama and encouraging gentle curiosity about the lives of those carrying Rome's fading torch. These emperors inherit a realm vast and complex, with borders stretched thin and populations diverse. The narrative focuses on continuity and adaptation, rather than failure, how leaders respond to migration pressures, economic strain, and political instability. Small, deliberate choices ripple across the empire, shaping destinies quietly. Listeners sense the slow rhythm of decision-making, proclamations, council meetings, and travel through provincial roads bathed in soft morning haze, painting a picture of duty, responsibility, and subtle influence. Military leadership, once centralized and robust, now functions with increasing autonomy. Generals and local commanders adapt to distant oversight, balancing the needs of troops with the expectations of rulers. Legions move with predictable precision, facing gradual challenges rather than sudden catastrophes. Listeners feel the careful cadence of marches, the soft rustle of banners in the breeze, and the distant echo of training. An empire maintaining order through routine, discipline, and adaptability, even as change looms quietly on the horizon. Diplomatic efforts continue as subtle negotiation. Treaties, alliances, and concessions form a delicate web connecting Rome with surrounding peoples. Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns are portrayed not as roaring invaders, but as patient actors in history's slow unfolding. Trade, tribute, and communication maintain equilibrium in measured steps. For viewers, this evokes imagery of envoys crossing silent roads, emissaries presenting gifts under muted sunlight, and decisions made in quiet rooms where the fate of cities hangs softly in the balance. Cultural life persists under gentle continuity. Religious ceremonies, marketplaces, forums, and festivals maintain normalcy even amid political uncertainty. Listeners drift through scenes of children playing near fountains, scholars copying texts in quiet chambers, and citizens observing rituals in sunlit courtyards. These scenes highlight human resilience, showing that life carries forward even as an empire ages. The focus on everyday life emphasizes calm reflection, curiosity, and immersive visualization rather than dramatic spectacle. The narrative also gently acknowledges succession issues, brief reigns, and internal power struggles. Rather than tension, these are presented as quiet ripples in the ongoing river of history. Emperors appear as both figures of authority and human beings responding to circumstance, and the listener absorbs this complexity as a reflective journey. Each decision, loss, and adjustment contributes to the narrative of continuity fading into transformation. By evening, the last emperor's stories blend into the broader rhythm of change. Citizens continue their lives, soldiers patrol quietly, and the empire's machinery hums with persistent, steady motion. Listeners are left with a sense of continuity and fragility intertwined. Rome endures, yet history is gently steering it toward new configurations. The final rulers drift into memory, their presence soft but enduring, creating a calm curiosity about what follows in the West's ultimate transition. Twilight settles over the Western Empire, and the listener is invited to reflect on the city and civilization that once dominated the Mediterranean world. The story is told softly. Rome does not fall in a crash of violence or fire, but fades gradually like sunlight over distant hills. Towns and villages continue their routines, markets hum quietly, and families gather for evening meals, observing traditions passed through generations. The narration emphasizes continuity, memory, and legacy, drawing listeners into calm reflection rather than shock. The migration of peoples into Roman territories is portrayed as gentle movement rather than invasion. Goths, Vandals, and Franks integrate in varying ways, adapting to existing structures while introducing new patterns of life. Trade continues in muted tones, artisans continue their craft, and cities adapt quietly to changing populations. Listeners imagine soft interactions along cobblestone streets, conversations exchanged under lanterns, and children learning from elders in peaceful courtyards, emphasizing human continuity amidst systemic change. Institutions and structures do not vanish abruptly. Laws, roads, aqueducts, and administrative mechanisms continue to function where possible. Governors, magistrates, and local leaders maintain order, and the machinery of the empire persists in measured operation. The narration highlights that Rome's influence remains, often unnoticed, shaping governance, urban planning, and cultural norms for centuries to come. For viewers, this provides a sense of calm permanence amid the perception of decline. Cultural and intellectual life endures subtly. Christianity spreads and adapts, philosophies persist, and art continues to flourish in both private and communal spaces. Festivals, rituals, and storytelling carry the values of a civilization forward. Listeners drift through scenes of scribes copying manuscripts by candlelight, children learning in quiet courtyards, and citizens observing religious or civic events, absorbing a calm sense of continuity, reflection, and human connection across time. The story gently addresses the final emperors, highlighting the quiet handover of authority and the gradual disappearance of centralized control in the West. Decisions are portrayed as careful responses to circumstance, and leadership becomes regional and adaptive rather than centralized. The narrative ensures that listeners feel the slow rhythm of transition, soft, inevitable, and shaped by countless small, deliberate acts. Finally, Rome's legacy is emphasized. Though the Western Empire's political structure fades, its ideas, innovations, and cultural patterns endure. Architecture, law, language, and faith travel across centuries and continents, leaving traces in ways both visible and unseen. Listeners are encouraged to imagine the glowing remnants of a once mighty civilization in every road, aqueduct, and written word, creating a gentle curiosity about history's ripple effects. Rome fades, yet it never truly ends. It whispers softly through the ages, a reminder that civilizations are never entirely lost, merely transformed.